Hello there, and welcome to Serapeum Histories, where curiosity slows its breathing and ancient stones are given the time they deserve. Tonight, we turn our attention to a structure so familiar that it almost feels ordinary, and yet so vast that it resists that comfort at every angle. The Great Pyramid stands on the Giza plateau with a kind of quiet patience. It does not explain itself. It does not announce its maker. It simply remains, as if confident that time will circle it endlessly without wearing it down. The question before us is simple to say and difficult to settle. Who really designed the Great Pyramid? Not who carried the blocks, not who funded the labour, not even who ruled at the time, but who conceived it. Who held the plan in mind before a single stone was set in place? Who determined the angles, the chambers, the alignment? Behind every monumental act of construction, there is an idea, and behind that idea, there is a mind. Sometimes a single mind, sometimes many. If you're listening from somewhere far from Egypt tonight, perhaps in a quiet apartment or a dimly lit room, imagine the desert air cooling after sunset. Imagine the long shadow of the pyramid stretching across the plateau. Consider for a moment where you are, and how far your present moment is from the builders who stood there 4,500 years ago. If you find this exploration steady and calming, a thoughtful way to end the day, a simple like or subscription helps this quiet corner of history continue to grow. Now, let us walk slowly toward the question carved in stone. The structure commonly called the Great Pyramid is more precisely the Pyramid of Khufu. It was built during the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom of Egypt, around 2580 to 2560 BCE. At least that is the conventional timeline. It stands as the largest of the pyramids at Giza, originally reaching about 146.6 metres in height. Even after losing its smooth outer casing stones, it still dominates the horizon. It consists of roughly 2.3 million limestone and granite blocks. Each block was quarried, transported, positioned. None of that happens without planning. The standard explanation is direct. Pharaoh Khufu commissioned the pyramid as his tomb. He ruled Egypt. He commanded resources. He possessed authority that was both political and divine. As king, he could mobilize tens of thousands of workers during the Nile flood season, when farming paused. According to this view, the design would have emerged from a combination of royal directive and skilled architects within the royal administration. There is evidence that supports this framework. Worker villages have been uncovered near Giza. Graffiti inside hidden chambers reference work gangs with names linked to Khufu. The broader tradition of pyramid building began before him and continued after him. His father, Sneferu, built multiple pyramids, including the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid at Dashur. These earlier monuments show experimentation. They reveal trial and adjustment. They suggest a learning curve. And yet, even within that explanation, the word designed carries weight. A monument of this scale is not improvised. It requires geometry, logistics, alignment, structural foresight. Someone determined the base measurements, nearly perfect in their squareness. Someone calculated the angle of inclination, approximately 51.5 degrees. Someone aligned the structure to true north with astonishing precision, deviating by only a fraction of a degree. That level of exactness invites closer inspection. Ancient Egyptian society did have architects. The most famous early example is Imhotep, who designed the step pyramid of Giza during the 3rd dynasty. His name survived in inscriptions. He was remembered, even deified in later periods. But for the Great Pyramid, no architect's name is clearly recorded in surviving inscriptions. The structure itself contains no grand dedicatory text crediting its designer. Silence surrounds the mind behind the plan. It is possible that the chief architect's name simply did not survive. Egyptian monuments often emphasize the pharaoh above all others. Creative credit flowed upward. The king was the divine focal point. To build for him was to build through him. The individual planner might have been known in his lifetime, but erased by time's erosion of papyrus and plaster. Still, when one studies the internal layout, the sense of deliberate planning grows stronger. The descending passage, the ascending passage, the grand gallery rising steeply toward the king's chamber. The relieving chambers above that chamber, constructed with massive granite beams to distribute weight. These features were not decorative. They were structural solutions. They reveal anticipation of stress points. They show understanding of load management. Such planning implies mathematical knowledge. The base length of each side averages about 230.3 metres, with only minor variation. The sides are nearly perfectly aligned to the cardinal directions. How did they achieve this? One explanation involves careful astronomical observation, perhaps using circumpolar stars. Another involves solar shadow tracking. Both require method and repetition. Egyptians possessed measuring tools. They had cubit rods. They used knotted ropes for surveying. The royal cubit was standardized. Geometry in its practical form was present, especially in land measurement after the Nile's floods. The idea that Egyptian architects understood right angles and proportional design is not speculative. It is evidenced in surviving artifacts and later architectural works. Yet the Great Pyramid's scale intensifies the question. Smaller projects tolerate minor miscalculations. Large ones amplify them. A slight angular error at the base multiplies into significant deviation at the apex. Maintaining consistency across millions of stones suggests centralized oversight and disciplined coordination. This was not casual craftsmanship. It was organized engineering. One can imagine a chief architect, perhaps holding a title now lost, working with scribes and overseers. Plans may have been sketched on papyrus or laid out full scale on levelled ground. Markings could have guided stone placement. Teams might have specialised in quarrying, transport, finishing, alignment. In this model, the design process was collaborative but directed. There is also the matter of internal chambers. The king's chamber is constructed of granite blocks transported from Aswan, hundreds of kilometres to the south. Granite is harder and more difficult to shape than limestone. Choosing granite for the central chamber suggests symbolic or structural reasoning, perhaps both. It adds complexity to the design. The Queen's chamber, positioned lower within the pyramid, may have served a different ritual function. The so-called air shafts, narrow channels extending from the chambers, align roughly towards certain stars. Some researchers have proposed symbolic connections to Orion or Sirius. Whether these alignments were intentional or coincidental remains debated, but the very existence of such shafts required foresight during construction. At this stage, the conventional answer still holds. Skilled Egyptian architects operating under royal authority designed the pyramid. They built upon earlier experiments. They refined techniques developed during Sneferu's reign. The bent pyramid's angle adjustment reveals that lessons were learned. The red pyramid demonstrates improved structural understanding. By the time of Khufu, those lessons may have converged into a mature architectural vision. Even so, the absence of a surviving master blueprint leaves room for speculation. No complete set of plans has been found. No inscription describes the planning process in detail. The Great Pyramid appears in the archaeological record as both culmination and mystery, and that tension is where the deeper investigation begins to take shape. If Khufu commissioned it, and if Egyptian architects designed it, then who among them conceived the final geometry? Was it a single visionary, like Imhotep before him? Was it a council of engineers? Was it incremental refinement rather than sudden genius? Before turning toward alternative theories, it is important to remain grounded in what is known. The Old Kingdom was capable of organised labour. It was capable of large-scale quarrying. It maintained administrative records, even if many have not survived. Egyptian society valued order, balance, and cosmic alignment. Monumental architecture expressed divine stability. The pyramid form itself evolved from earlier mastabas and stepped structures. Design does not emerge in isolation. It grows from tradition. The Great Pyramid did not appear without precedent. It stands at the peak of a developmental arc. Yet its refinement makes that arc feel compressed. Within a few generations, Egyptian builders progressed from experimental angled pyramids to near perfection in form. That acceleration prompts the central question to return, not loudly but steadily. Who really designed the Great Pyramid? Was it simply the product of cumulative experience reaching maturity? Or did one individual synthesize prior knowledge into something unprecedented? As we continue, it becomes necessary to examine the architectural lineage more closely, to understand how earlier pyramids paved the way, and whether the Great Pyramid represents continuity or departure. The story does not rush forward. It shifts gradually, stone by stone, toward the minds that shaped it. When most people picture the Great Pyramid, they picture certainty, a name, a date, a purpose. The story is usually presented in a neat line. Pharaoh Khufu ruled Egypt during the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom. He commanded vast resources. He ordered the construction of the largest pyramid ever built. It served as his tomb. Workers carried the stones. Engineers guided the alignment. The structure rose over 2 decades. Khufu died. The pyramid remained. That is the version repeated in textbooks, documentaries, museum plaques, and tour guide explanations delivered under the bright Egyptian sun. It is tidy. It is supported by archaeological evidence. It is also, when examined closely, both solid and incomplete at the same time. Khufu, known to the Greeks as Cheops, ruled around 2580 to 2560 BCE. He was the son of Sneferu, a pharaoh who had already invested enormous resources into pyramid building. Sneferu constructed at least 3 major pyramids, including the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid at Dashur. By the time Khufu ascended the throne, Egypt had already entered an era of monumental stone architecture. Pyramid construction was not an experiment. It was a state enterprise. The official story rests on several pillars of evidence. One of the most important pieces came to light in 2013, when archaeologists uncovered papyri near the Red Sea at Wadi al-Jaf. These documents, known as the Diary of Mira, record the activities of an overseer involved in transporting limestone blocks from Tura to Giza. The papyri explicitly reference the horizon of Khufu, a phrase believed to refer to the Great Pyramid. The diary describes boats carrying stone along the Nile and through canal systems toward the construction site. This is not myth. It is administrative record. It places organised labour, logistics, and royal oversight firmly in the historical frame. It shows that materials were being delivered for a project associated with Khufu. That alone strengthens the traditional attribution significantly. There is also the matter of graffiti inside the pyramid itself. In the 19th century, explorers discovered quarry marks in the relieving chambers above the king's chamber. These marks include crew names such as the Friends of Khufu and the Drunkards of Menkaure. They appear to be work gang identifiers, written in red ochre. Their presence suggests that teams working on the pyramid identified themselves in relation to Khufu's reign. Skeptics have questioned these markings over the years, but most Egyptologists accept them as authentic Old Kingdom inscriptions. If correct, they anchor the pyramid within Khufu's administration, rather than a lost civilization or later reconstruction. Beyond textual evidence, there is archaeological context. At Giza, excavations have uncovered worker housing, bakeries, fish remains, cattle bones, and cemeteries associated with labourers. These were not enslaved masses driven by whips, as older narratives once claimed. Evidence suggests they were organised work crews, possibly seasonal labourers rotating in during the Nile flood when agricultural work paused. They were fed, they were housed, they were buried with care. The official picture that emerges is one of centralised state planning. The Old Kingdom possessed a bureaucracy capable of organising tens of thousands of workers. It had quarrying expertise. It had transportation infrastructure along the Nile. It had surveying knowledge sufficient to align large structures to cardinal directions. In this framework, the Great Pyramid becomes less mysterious and more the apex of a well-established system. Khufu himself, however, remains strangely distant. Compared to later pharaohs, we know surprisingly little about his personality. No grand narrative text from his reign survive describing his character or ambitions. Later Egyptian literature sometimes portrays him as harsh or distant, but those accounts were written centuries afterward and cannot be taken as reliable biography. What we do know is that the pyramid was part of a larger funerary complex. It included mortuary temples, subsidiary pyramids for queens, boat pits containing disassembled cedar vessels, and causeways connecting structures to the Nile floodplain. This was not a standalone monument. It was a carefully integrated design reflecting religious beliefs about the afterlife and kingship. In Old Kingdom theology, the pharaoh was not simply a political ruler. He was a divine intermediary. His successful transition into the afterlife ensured cosmic order. The pyramid functioned as both tomb and symbol, representing the primeval mound from which creation emerged. It was architecture shaped by cosmology. That cosmological dimension strengthens the argument for Egyptian design rather than foreign intervention. The pyramid form evolved from mastaba tombs into stepped pyramids, and eventually into smooth-sided true pyramids. Each stage reflects internal cultural development. The structure's orientation toward cardinal directions aligns with Egyptian concern for cosmic order, known as Mayat. And yet, the official story leaves open the question of authorship at a more personal level. Khufu commissioned it. That is widely accepted. But commissioning is not designing. A king can demand a monument without drawing its angles. In the Old Kingdom, the highest-ranking official responsible for construction projects often held the title Overseer of all royal works. It is likely that such a figure existed during Khufu's reign. His name may have been recorded on papyrus now lost to decay. The climate of Egypt preserves stone but not fragile administrative plans indefinitely. Some scholars propose that the architect was likely a close relative of Khufu or a trusted high official. The complexity of the project would have required someone deeply embedded in royal authority. The architect would have needed both technical skill and political backing. Without royal support, no design of that scale could have moved beyond concept. Another point often raised is the rapid progression from Sneferu's experimental pyramids to Khufu's near-perfect structure. The bent pyramid changes angle mid-construction, suggesting structural instability was discovered during building. The red pyramid, built afterward, achieves a stable angle and true pyramid shape. Within one generation, knowledge advanced dramatically. Supporters of the official account argue that this progression demonstrates learning. Engineers refined their understanding. They corrected mistakes. By Khufu's time, they applied accumulated lessons to produce a refined result. This interpretation sees no mystery, only development. Still, some observers note that the Great Pyramid exhibits a level of precision that seems to exceed even the Red Pyramid. Its base is level to within a few centimetres. Its alignment to true north is astonishingly accurate. Achieving that degree of precision without modern instruments requires extraordinary surveying skill. Egyptologists suggest techniques such as observing circumpolar stars with a plumb line, creating sighting rods aligned to stellar transits, or measuring shadows at specific times of year. None of these methods are impossible. They require patience, repetition, and a clear understanding of geometry. What the official story emphasizes is competence. It assumes that Old Kingdom Egyptians were capable engineers who deserve credit rather than skepticism. Too often in past centuries, ancient achievements were dismissed as impossible without lost civilizations or outside intervention. Modern archaeology pushes back against that bias, insisting that human ingenuity within known cultural frameworks is sufficient. There is also the matter of labour organisation. Estimates of the workforce vary widely, but current scholarship suggests a rotating labour force of perhaps 20,000 to 30,000 workers, rather than 100,000 slaves. Crews were divided into gangs and files. Food supplies were centrally distributed. Animal bones found at worker settlements suggest a diet including beef and fish, not starvation rations. Such organisation implies planning on a scale that goes beyond stone placement. The pyramid required quarries at Giza and Tura. It required transport canals that connected to the Nile. It required sledges, lubrication techniques, and possibly ramps of various designs. Whether straight, zigzagging, or internal, ramps remain debated, but some method of elevation was certainly employed. All of this reinforces the official narrative's strength. The pyramid was not conjured by mystery. It was built by a state with the will and means to do so. Even the timeline fits within plausibility. If construction lasted roughly 20 years, that would require placing an average of about 300 to 400 blocks per day. Spread across large teams working in organised shifts, this becomes demanding but not inconceivable. It would have required discipline, but not magic. Yet there remains a subtle discomfort for some observers. The official account explains the how and the when. It ties the monument to Khufu's reign with reasonable confidence, but the identity of the chief designer remains unnamed. The architect does not step forward from the shadows of history. It is possible that the ancient Egyptians did not value individual credit in the way modern societies do. The work was for the king. The king embodied divine authority. To attribute design solely to a subordinate might have seemed unnecessary or even inappropriate. In that sense, the pyramid may have been perceived not as the work of one brilliant architect, but as the manifestation of royal will shaped through collective expertise. The design could have emerged through consultation, revision, and shared knowledge rather than singular inspiration. Even so, when one stands before the Great Pyramid, the mind naturally seeks intention. Someone chose its angle, someone determined the placement of chambers, someone approved the alignment. Those decisions required thought, calculation, and vision. As we remain within the official story, it is important to recognise its strength before moving beyond it. There is credible evidence linking the monument to Khufu. There is archaeological support for organised Egyptian labour. There is cultural continuity in pyramid evolution. There is administrative documentation placing materials in motion during his reign. At the same time, the absence of explicit architectural attribution leaves space for inquiry. Not wild speculation, but measured curiosity. Within the framework of Old Kingdom Egypt, who held the plan? Was it an unnamed overseer of works? Was it a council of surveyors and priests combining astronomical knowledge with engineering? Was it Khufu himself, advising and approving based on religious symbolism? The official story answers part of the question clearly. Khufu commissioned the Great Pyramid. It was built during his reign. It was part of a larger funerary complex. It reflects Egyptian religious and political structures. What it does not fully answer is the identity and process behind its precise conception. That question invites a closer look at the architects of the Old Kingdom, the systems of knowledge they inherited, and the experiments that preceded this monument. To understand who really designed the Great Pyramid, it becomes necessary to examine not just the king who ordered it, but the lineage of minds that shaped the science and craft capable of realising it. When we look at the Great Pyramid today, we see finished stone. We see angles, edges, chambers, corridors. What we do not see is the plan. There is no surviving master drawing, no preserved parchment showing measurements laid out in ink, no carved tablet detailing dimensions from foundation to apex. For a structure so exact, so deliberate, the absence of a blueprint feels almost unnatural. In modern construction, even a modest house begins with plans, floor layouts, elevations, structural diagrams, load calculations. Architects revise drafts, engineers sign off on stress tolerances, inspectors approve foundations. The idea that the largest stone structure ever built would leave behind no comprehensive design document seems strange at first glance. Yet in ancient Egypt, the materials used for planning were fragile. Papyrus decays, wood rots, ink fades, stone endures. The plan may have existed, but it was never meant to survive thousands of years. The archaeological record is full of fragments of everyday administration, ostraca with quick notes, papyri with delivery logs, quarry marks scribbled in red paint, but a full architectural plan for the Great Pyramid has never been discovered. Not in a tomb, not in a sealed chamber, not buried beneath sand. That silence shapes how we interpret the monument. It is possible that design knowledge was transmitted orally among master builders and overseers. In highly specialised crafts, apprenticeship often carries technique forward without detailed written manuals. A senior architect might have walked the levelled foundation with measuring rods, giving instructions directly. Scribes could have recorded key numbers on temporary materials. The blueprint may have existed only long enough to guide construction, then disappeared into dust. Still, the scale of the pyramid suggests more than informal planning. The base measures roughly 230.3 metres per side. The deviation between sides is minimal. The levelling of the base is accurate to within a few centimetres. Achieving that kind of precision requires pre-calculation. It requires surveying before stone placement. Someone determined where north was. Someone established a square nearly perfect in its geometry. How did they do it? Several theories exist. One widely accepted explanation involves stellar observation. By watching the transit of circumpolar stars across the night sky and aligning sighting rods, surveyors could establish true north. Once north was fixed, east, south, and west followed. That initial alignment would have anchored the entire structure. Such work would require instruments. Egyptian depictions show surveyors using a tool called the merket, a kind of sighting instrument combined with a plumb line. There was also the bay, a sighting rod. Combined, these tools allowed for relatively precise astronomical measurements. Repetition over several nights could refine accuracy. Yet tools alone do not create plans. A blueprint is a conceptual map. It defines not only the exterior footprint but the internal layout. Inside the Great Pyramid are multiple chambers and passageways. The descending passage, the ascending passage, the grand gallery, the king's chamber, the queen's chamber, and the unfinished subterranean chamber. Their placement was not random. They intersect at specific angles and elevations. The grand gallery, rising at a steep incline, is particularly striking. Its corbelled walls narrow as they ascend, distributing weight inward. Above the king's chamber lie 5 relieving chambers, capped with massive granite beams and angled blocks to divert pressure. Those structural solutions imply anticipation of weight loads long before the upper stones were placed. This suggests that the internal architecture was planned from the outset rather than improvised as the pyramid rose. If adjustments had been necessary mid-construction, they would have required enormous reworking. The efficiency of the internal layout points to prior calculation. Yet there are anomalies. The subterranean chamber appears unfinished. Its rough walls and incomplete carving hint that the original burial plan may have shifted during construction. Some scholars propose that the burial chamber was initially intended to be below ground, following earlier traditions, and later relocated upward to the king's chamber. If so, the design evolved mid-project. This possibility complicates the idea of a single, fixed blueprint. Perhaps the plan was revised as construction progressed. Architectural projects even today undergo modification during building. Constraints emerge, ideas change, political or religious considerations shift priorities. There is also the question of the so-called air shafts extending from the king's and queen's chambers. Their narrowness suggests they were not designed for human movement. Their alignment towards certain celestial points has inspired theories about stellar symbolism. If intentional, that alignment required planning at the design stage. The shafts had to be integrated while stones were still accessible. Without a surviving plan, interpretation relies on inference. Researchers study the angles, measure dimensions, and reverse engineer possible design methods. Some note that the ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to its height approximates 2 pi. Others argue that such mathematical relationships are coincidental rather than deliberate. The debate persists because the blueprint is missing. Without written intent, geometry becomes subject to projection. Another layer to consider is the organisational blueprint, the administrative design behind the physical one. The Diary of Mera confirms material transport logistics, but it does not outline architectural schematics. It shows execution, not conception. The workers knew where to deliver stone. They did not need to understand the entire structure. In large projects, knowledge is often compartmentalised. Quarry workers focus on extraction. Transport crews focus on movement. Placement teams focus on alignment. Only a small circle may have understood the full design. If that circle's records were lost, the monument becomes its own silent testimony. Some argue that the absence of a blueprint fuels alternative theories. If no written plan survives, then perhaps the knowledge was inherited from an earlier civilization. Perhaps the design was too advanced for its time. However, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Egypt's climate preserves stone better than papyrus. Administrative archives were vulnerable to fire, moisture, and neglect over millennia. Examples from other ancient sites reinforce this pattern. Detailed plans for many Roman structures have not survived either, yet their engineering was sophisticated. Architectural drawings were working documents, not monuments. They were not carved into granite for eternity. There is also the cultural dimension. In Egyptian art and inscriptions, emphasis rests on outcomes and divine order rather than procedural documentation. Temples celebrate completed achievements. They rarely include step-by-step construction manuals. The absence of blueprints may reflect cultural priorities rather than lost knowledge. Even so, when examining the Great Pyramid's internal precision, it becomes tempting to imagine a master diagram once spread across a table. The intersection of passages, the angle of ascent, the placement of the granite beams, those decisions required foresight. They required someone to visualize the entire structure before the apex was even begun. Could they have used scale models? It is plausible. Small wooden or clay models might have represented the structure in miniature. Ancient Egyptians created detailed models of boats, houses, and granaries for tombs. A model pyramid could have served as a three-dimensional guide during planning. If so, it has not survived. It is worth noting that later pyramids show less precision. The 5th and 6th dynasty pyramids decline in scale and structural refinement. Their casing stones were thinner, their internal chambers less elaborate. If the Great Pyramid's design knowledge had been fully systematized and recorded, one might expect continuity at that level. Instead, the pinnacle seems brief. That brief peak raises questions about how knowledge was transmitted. Was it concentrated in a small group that dissipated after Khufu's reign? Did political shifts alter resource allocation? Did economic strain reduce ambition? The missing blueprint does not just obscure authorship, it obscures process. Surveying techniques have been experimentally reconstructed by modern researchers. Using simple tools and star observation, teams have achieved alignments remarkably close to the pyramids. This suggests that advanced instruments were not necessary. Skill and repetition could suffice. That reduces the need for lost high-technology explanations. At the same time, modern reconstructions benefit from hindsight. We know what the finished pyramid looks like. Ancient planners did not have that luxury. They had to anticipate errors before they occurred. They had to calculate stone volumes and weight distribution without computer modelling. This brings the focus back to intellectual infrastructure. The Old Kingdom had scribes trained in mathematics. Surviving mathematical papyri from later periods show familiarity with fractions, area calculation, and volume estimation. While these documents date centuries after Khufu, they likely reflect earlier traditions. Mathematical competence was embedded in administrative culture. Even so, the leap from land measurement to a 146-metre stone pyramid is substantial. It suggests that Egyptian architecture operated at a level of applied geometry not always fully appreciated. The blueprint may have existed in layered form. baseline measurements on one document, internal chamber schematics on another, elevation guidelines memorized or marked directly on stone. Marks have been found on some blocks indicating placement orientation. These may have served as construction guides. However, they do not amount to a comprehensive plan. The missing blueprint thus becomes both a gap and a lens. It forces historians to reconstruct design intention from physical evidence alone. It invites caution in assigning modern expectations to ancient practice. It also leaves space for deeper examination of who held the knowledge necessary to conceive the whole. If the pyramid was the culmination of generational learning, then the blueprint may have been distributed across experience rather than contained in a single scroll. Knowledge might have been embodied in master builders whose training stretched back through Sneferu's projects and earlier structures. The absence of written plans does not diminish the intelligence behind the monument. Instead, it shifts attention toward human memory, apprenticeship, and institutional continuity. It suggests a system where design authority was concentrated but not individually commemorated. As we move forward, the focus naturally shifts toward those architects of the Old Kingdom who stood at the intersection of mathematics, religion, and engineering. If no blueprint survives, then the minds who carried its equivalent in memory become even more central. Understanding who really designed the Great Pyramid requires examining not just what was built, but who was capable of envisioning it within the cultural and technical landscape of ancient Egypt. When we speak of architects in the Old Kingdom, it is easy to picture a solitary genius standing over a stretch of desert with rolled plans under his arm, issuing commands while the pyramid rises around him. That image is modern. The reality was almost certainly more layered, more administrative, and deeply embedded in the structure of Egyptian society. The Old Kingdom, spanning roughly from 2686 to 2181 BCE, was a period of centralized authority and growing monumental ambition. The pharaoh was not merely a king. He was considered divine, a living embodiment of cosmic order. Monumental architecture was not decoration. It was political theology carved in stone. Within that environment, builders were not independent artists. They were officials, engineers, priests, and administrators, operating within a state system. Titles provide our first clues. In inscriptions from tombs and reliefs, we encounter phrases such as overseer of all royal works, chief of sculptors, and inspector of craftsmen. These were not ceremonial labels. They represented positions within a bureaucratic hierarchy responsible for large-scale construction projects. The men who held these titles were educated, literate, and close to royal power. One of the most famous figures associated with early pyramid design is Imhotep, architect of the step pyramid at Saqqara for Pharaoh Giza during the 3rd dynasty. Although he predates the Great Pyramid by several decades, Imhotep demonstrates that individual designers could attain recognition. His name survived. He was later deified as a patron of wisdom and medicine. His association with monumental construction proves that architects could achieve lasting reputation, even if most did not. However, after Imhotep, the record grows quieter. By the 4th dynasty, when Khufu ruled, no surviving inscription clearly identifies the chief architect of the Great Pyramid. That absence does not mean there was none. It suggests that either his name has not survived, or that credit was subsumed under royal authority. The Egyptian state operated on a principle of collective service to the king. Projects were framed as manifestations of pharaonic will. Even if a master architect oversaw design, the official narrative centered on the ruler. This cultural context matters when searching for personal authorship. We do know that the Old Kingdom had an established class of skilled artisans and engineers. Tomb reliefs show scenes of quarrying, stone shaping, and transportation. Workers used copper chisels, dolerite pounding stones, wooden sledges, and ropes. While copper is softer than granite, repeated hammering combined with abrasive sand could shape hard stone effectively. These techniques required practice and coordination. Surveying was another specialized skill. The act of stretching the cord, depicted in temple reliefs, symbolize the ritual and practical laying out of a building's foundation. The ceremony involved priests and surveyors using ropes and stakes to establish right angles and align structures to celestial markers. It was both sacred and technical. The builders of the Old Kingdom were not improvising. They inherited knowledge from earlier mastaba construction and from Sneferu's pyramid experiments at Dashur. The bent pyramid's change in angle mid-construction suggests that structural stress was recognised and corrected. The red pyramid achieved a stable design. By the time of Khufu, experience had accumulated. The workforce itself was organised into files, rotating teams likely drawn from across Egypt during the Nile flood season. Evidence from worker villages at Giza shows standardised housing, bakeries capable of producing large quantities of bread, and areas for brewing beer. Animal bones indicate that workers consumed meat regularly. This was a state-supported labour force, not a random assembly of forced labourers. Overseeing such a workforce required administrative precision. Scribes tracked deliveries of stone, food supplies, and manpower assignments. The Diary of Mira confirms that limestone was transported in organised shipments. Canal systems connected the Nile to the construction site. None of this functions without managerial oversight. Within that structure, the architect's role would have been complex. He needed to understand geometry, load distribution, and spatial planning. He also needed to navigate court politics and religious expectations. The pyramid was not simply a geometric exercise. It symbolised the primeval mound, the sun's rays, and the pharaoh's ascent to the heavens. Religious cosmology influenced design decisions. The pyramid's orientation toward cardinal directions aligned it with cosmic order. The internal chambers may have been placed to support ritual beliefs about the king's transformation. Architecture and theology were not separate domains. They informed one another. Training for such architects likely began early. Young boys from elite families were educated in scribal schools. They learned hieroglyphic writing, mathematics, and administrative skills. Some would have specialised further in construction and engineering. The Egyptian state valued record-keeping. Measurement was essential for taxation and land division after the Nile's floods. Applied mathematics was not rare knowledge. Surviving mathematical papyri from later periods, such as the Rind mathematical papyrus, show that Egyptians could calculate areas, volumes, and slopes. Although these documents date centuries after the Great Pyramid, they reflect long-standing traditions. The concept of Sikid, used to describe the horizontal run per vertical rise of a pyramid slope, appears in later texts. This suggests that slope calculation was understood and codified. If the Seked system was already in use during the 4th dynasty, then the angle of the Great Pyramid could have been expressed in practical, repeatable terms. Builders would not have needed abstract trigonometry. They needed ratios and standardized cubits. With consistent measurement, precision becomes achievable. Another dimension to consider is specialization. The Great Pyramid required quarry masters, transport coordinators, ramp engineers, stone finishers, and alignment experts. It is unlikely that one individual personally oversaw every technical detail. More plausibly, a chief architect coordinated teams of specialists, each responsible for a segment of the project. The relieving chambers above the king's chamber demonstrate advanced structural thinking. Massive granite beams were stacked to distribute weight, capped with angled blocks to redirect pressure. This solution indicates awareness of potential collapse and preemptive mitigation. Such foresight implies planning at the design stage rather than reactive adjustment. The Old Kingdom also possessed experience in large-scale quarrying. Limestone was extracted locally at Giza. Fine Tura limestone was transported for casing stones. Granite came from Aswan, over 800 kilometres away by river. Transporting granite blocks weighing up to 60 tons required coordinated river traffic and seasonal timing. This level of logistical complexity reinforces the idea that Egyptian builders operated within a sophisticated administrative framework. They were not primitive labourers stumbling into accidental precision. They were organised professionals embedded in a stable state apparatus. Yet recognition remains elusive. While Imhotep's fame endured, later architects remain unnamed. This absence may reflect the fragile nature of documentation. It may also reflect a cultural norm where individual authorship mattered less than collective achievement under divine kingship. Some historians suggest that Hemiunu, a high-ranking official and possible relative of Khufu, could have been involved in overseeing the pyramid's construction. Hemiunu held titles related to royal works and was buried in a large mastaba at Giza. His statue depicts him with a confident, composed expression. Although no inscription explicitly states that he designed the pyramid, his status places him within the circle capable of such responsibility. The possibility that Hemiunu served as chief architect does not resolve the matter conclusively. It does, however, illustrate that identifiable individuals existed who combined administrative authority and technical oversight. If not Hemiunu, then someone similar held the role. As the Old Kingdom progressed beyond Khufu's reign, pyramid construction continued but gradually declined in scale and precision. Khafre and Menkaure built pyramids at Giza, though smaller than Khufu's. Later dynasties reduced ambition further. This pattern suggests that the peak of architectural coordination occurred within a narrow historical window. Such peaks often arise from convergence. Political stability, economic strength, accumulated knowledge, and strong leadership align briefly. When those factors shift, monumental capacity diminishes. The architects of the Old Kingdom may have benefited from precisely such convergence during Khufu's reign. It is important to resist projecting modern assumptions of lost secrets or vanished super technology onto these builders. Evidence indicates practical competence rather than mystery. Copper tools, stone hammers, ropes, sledges and ramps suffice when combined with labour and time. Still, competence does not diminish achievement. Designing and constructing the Great Pyramid required intellectual discipline and vision. It required an understanding of geometry applied at monumental scale. It required integration of religious symbolism and structural logic. The architects of the Old Kingdom operated in a world without steel, without cranes, without written blueprints preserved for millennia. Yet they produced a structure that has endured earthquakes, erosion, and political upheaval for over 4,000 years. Understanding who really designed the Great Pyramid therefore depends not only on identifying a name but on recognizing a system. That system included educated elites, trained surveyors, skilled craftsmen, and a centralized state capable of sustaining long-term projects. The missing blueprint becomes less troubling in this context. The knowledge may have lived in human networks rather than parchment archives. Apprentices learned from masters. Surveyors practiced techniques handed down across generations. Administrative continuity preserved method even when individual names faded. As attention turns toward earlier pyramid experiments and the refinement that occurred between Sneferu and Khufu, it becomes clear that the Great Pyramid did not emerge from isolation. It stood at the end of a developmental chain shaped by builders whose expertise matured through trial, error, and disciplined repetition. Long before the Great Pyramid rose at Giza, there was another bold attempt to turn stone into a statement of permanence. It did not begin as a smooth-sided monument reaching toward the sky. It began as a mastaba, a rectangular tomb with sloping sides, built of mud brick or stone. That familiar shape had served Egypt's elite for generations. Then, during the Third Dynasty, something changed. Under Pharaoh Djoser, at Saqqara, a new idea took form. Instead of building a single mastaba, the design expanded upward. One layer was placed atop another, then another, until the structure rose in 6 distinct steps. What had once been horizontal became vertical. The tomb was no longer a low platform. It became a statement visible across the desert. The man credited with this transformation is Imhotep. Unlike most architects of the Old Kingdom, his name survived. In later centuries he was remembered not only as a builder, but as a sage. even a deity associated with knowledge and healing. That later reverence complicates the historical record slightly, but there is little doubt that he served Djoser in an official capacity that included oversight of construction. The step pyramid complex at Saqqara was not a single structure. It was an enclosed ceremonial landscape, complete with courtyards, temples, and symbolic buildings. The scale of planning required for such a complex suggests that Imhotep was more than a stonemason. He was an administrator, a designer, and a visionary who understood both structural possibility and royal symbolism. Before this moment, large-scale stone construction had been limited. Mud brick was common. Stone was used selectively. The step pyramid represented a shift toward durable, monumental limestone architecture. That transition required rethinking material behaviour. Mud brick allows flexibility. Limestone demands precision. The step pyramid's construction appears to have evolved in phases. Archaeological evidence indicates that the original mastaba was enlarged and then built upward in successive stages. This suggests experimentation during construction. The final result, 6 stepped tiers reaching about 60 metres in height, was unprecedented. Imhotep's contribution lies not only in the vertical stacking, but in the conceptual leap it represents. He transformed a traditional tomb into a monumental staircase toward the heavens. In Egyptian religious thought, the pharaoh's ascent to the afterlife was central. The stepped form may have symbolized a pathway for that journey. However, the step pyramid was not a true pyramid. Its sides were tiered, not smooth. The transition from step form to smooth-sided true pyramid occurred in the next dynasty, most notably under Pharaoh Khufu's father. Between Imhotep's design and the Great Pyramid, several experiments bridge the gap. Pharaoh's projects at Dashur are particularly instructive. The bent pyramid reveals a mid-construction change in slope. The lower section rises at about 54 degrees, then shifts to a shallower angle of about 43 degrees. This adjustment likely responded to structural instability. The builders recognized stress fractures and altered their design to prevent collapse. The Red Pyramid, built shortly thereafter, adopts a consistent shallow angle from base to apex. It is widely considered the first successful smooth-sided true pyramid. Its construction demonstrates learning from prior mistakes. It stands as proof that Egyptian architects refined their techniques through practical experience. In that context, Imhotep's step pyramid appears as the beginning of a trajectory rather than an isolated marvel. It introduced large-scale stone construction and vertical monumentality. Pharaoh's projects corrected structural weaknesses and refined geometric form. By the time Khufu commissioned his pyramid at Giza, the accumulated knowledge of 2 generations stood behind him. What makes Imhotep's role especially significant is that he represents the first identifiable architect in this chain. He shows that design leadership existed. He demonstrates that the concept of a master planner guiding monumental construction was already present in Egyptian society before the Great Pyramid. It is worth examining what the step pyramid complex reveals about organisational capacity. The enclosure wall alone stretches over 1.6 kilometres in length, punctuated by symbolic doorways and colonnades. Stone columns within the complex imitate bundled reeds, suggesting that builders translated earlier architectural forms into durable limestone. This required both aesthetic sensitivity and technical skill. Imhotep's work also suggests that design decisions were not purely structural, they were symbolic. The complex included a Hebsed court where the pharaoh would renew his rule in ritual performance. The architecture provided space for ceremonial enactment of kingship. This intertwining of form and meaning would continue in later pyramids. As the design evolved from stepped to smooth, the symbolic dimension may have shifted slightly. Smooth-sided pyramids have been associated with the sun's rays, particularly during the 4th dynasty when solar theology gained prominence. The pyramid's shape may have represented a solidified beam of sunlight, linking the king with the solar deity. this evolution did not erase Imhotep's contribution. It expanded upon it. His decision to build upward in stone created a template. The technical lessons learned at Saqqara informed the more ambitious projects at Dashur. Each stage preserved certain principles while modifying others. By examining the masonry of the step pyramid, researchers have noted differences in block size and placement compared to later pyramids. The stone blocks are smaller and less uniform than those used at Giza. This suggests that quarrying and shaping techniques improved over time. Standardization increased. Precision tightened. This gradual refinement counters arguments that the Great Pyramid appeared fully formed without precedent. Instead, it stands at the end of visible development. Imhotep initiated a process that others advanced. Still, one cannot ignore the dramatic leap in scale from the step pyramid to the Great Pyramid. Djoser's monument, though impressive, is dwarfed by Khufu's. The difference in mass, height, and internal complexity is substantial. That leap required confidence born of experience. Imhotep's era established that stone could replace mud brick on a grand scale. Sneferu's era demonstrated that smooth-sided pyramids could stand securely. Khufu's era integrated precision alignment and internal architectural sophistication to a degree unmatched before or after. In this lineage, Imhotep appears as the first great visionary. He may not have imagined the Great Pyramid in its final form, but he shifted the trajectory of Egyptian architecture. He proved that monumental stone structures could serve as vehicles for royal immortality. It is also important to note that Imhotep's status in later Egyptian tradition suggests cultural memory-valued architects, even if their names were not always preserved. His elevation to near-mythic stature implies that design intellect was recognized as significant. However, Imhotep's documented role does not necessarily establish a direct line of instruction to Khufu's architect. Generational transmission in ancient societies can be complex. Knowledge may have been passed through families, guilds, or state offices. The absence of detailed records obscures the exact mechanism. What can be inferred is that by the 4th dynasty, Egyptian builders operated within an established tradition of monumental design. They had confronted structural collapse, they had revised slopes, they had standardized measurement units, they had mastered large-scale quarry logistics. The concept of sect, describing pyramid slope in terms of horizontal displacement per cubit of vertical rise, likely matured during this period. Even if formal documentation survives only from later eras, practical use probably predates written codification. A builder who understood sect could communicate slope in simple ratios, ensuring consistency across the structure. Imhotep's example also underscores the role of creativity within state service. While pyramids expressed royal authority, their realization depended on individuals capable of innovation. The step pyramid's expansion from a single mastaba into a 6-tiered monument was not inevitable. It required someone to propose the change and persuade the king. That dynamic likely continued under Sneferu and Khufu. Architects may have proposed solutions, adjusted plans, and overseen corrections. They were not passive executors of royal whim. They were technical experts operating within a hierarchical framework. Understanding the Great Pyramid's design, therefore, demands recognition of this developmental arc. It did not emerge from silence. It emerged from experimentation begun at Saqqara. It matured through structural lessons learned at Dashur. It reached precision at Giza. Imhotep's contribution lies in initiating the architectural ambition that made such evolution possible. His step pyramid established verticality and permanence as central themes. Subsequent architects refined the geometry and structural strategy. As attention gradually shifts from Imhotep to the architects of Sneferu and then to those serving Khufu, the pattern becomes clearer. Each generation built upon the previous one's achievements. The Great Pyramid's design reflects accumulated knowledge rather than isolated genius. At the same time, cumulative development does not eliminate the need for leadership. Someone during Khufu's reign synthesized inherited techniques, into a coherent plan. Whether that figure's name was Hemiunu or another official lost to history, he stood on foundations laid by Imhotep's first great vision. The path from stepped tiers to smooth faces traces not only architectural evolution, but institutional growth. It reveals a culture capable of learning from structural failure and refining geometric understanding. That capacity sets the stage for examining how trial and error shaped the final form of the Great Pyramid, and how experimentation itself became a quiet architect in the story of its design. If the Great Pyramid represents confidence, then the Bent Pyramid represents caution discovered the hard way. It stands at Dashur, south of Giza, commissioned by Pharaoh Khufu during the 4th dynasty. At first glance it appears almost symmetrical. Then the eye notices the change. About halfway up, the angle shifts. The lower portion rises steeply. The upper portion relaxes into a gentler slope. It looks as though the builders paused mid-ambition and reconsidered. The Bent Pyramid is not an accident. It is a correction frozen in limestone. Its lower angle measures approximately 54 degrees. The upper section shifts to about 43 degrees. That adjustment was not aesthetic. It was structural. Something during construction signalled instability. Cracks in internal chambers, unusual stress patterns, and the sheer steepness of the original design likely alerted the builders to danger. Limestone blocks stacked at such an angle exert enormous outward pressure. Without sufficient understanding of load distribution, collapse becomes a real risk. The change in angle reduced that pressure, making the upper structure lighter and more stable. This moment in Egyptian architecture is crucial. It shows that pyramid construction was not mystical perfection from the beginning. It was a process of engineering refinement. The builders confronted a problem and adapted. They did not abandon the project, they adjusted it. The Bent Pyramid also reveals something about design decision-making. The original steep slope suggests ambition. Perhaps Khufu wanted a monument taller and more imposing than any before. The choice of 54 degrees would have produced a sharper, more dramatic profile. However, that choice may have pushed the limits of their structural knowledge at the time. When cracks appeared, the response was practical: lower the angle, reduce the mass above the stress points. The shift creates the distinctive bend, but it also preserves the pyramid from catastrophic failure. The monument remains standing over 4,000 years later, a testament not only to ambition but to adaptability. Nearby stands the Red Pyramid, also commissioned by Khufu. Unlike its bent predecessor, it maintains a consistent angle of about 43 degrees throughout. Its structure appears stable. It is often considered the first successful true smooth-sided pyramid. The contrast between the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid reveals rapid learning within a single reign. The Bent Pyramid thus functions as a laboratory of stone. It embodies trial and error in visible form. It tells us that Egyptian architects were experimenting with angles, materials, and internal configurations. They were not following a timeless secret formula. They were refining technique through experience. Inside the Bent Pyramid, the internal chambers also reflect evolving understanding. There are two separate entrance systems, one on the north face and another on the west. The internal layout is complex and somewhat irregular compared to later pyramids. This irregularity suggests ongoing adjustments during construction. The presence of structural reinforcements inside the pyramid indicates awareness of stress management. Wooden beams were used to stabilize certain areas temporarily. Builders were responding to structural realities in real time. These lessons mattered profoundly for what came next. By the time Khufu began planning his pyramid at Giza, the knowledge gained from Khufu's experiments would have been fresh. Engineers had observed what happened when slopes were too steep. They had tested solutions. They had seen success in the Red Pyramid's shallower design. The Great Pyramid's angle, approximately 51.5 degrees, falls between the Bent Pyramid's original steepness and the Red Pyramid's gentler slope. This choice suggests deliberate calculation. It balances height and stability. It achieves imposing grandeur without repeating earlier structural risk. Trial and error does not imply incompetence, it implies growth. In modern engineering, prototypes are tested, modified, and improved. Sneferu's pyramids served as prototypes on a monumental scale. The bent pyramid exposed limitations. The red pyramid demonstrated correction. The Great Pyramid integrated refined principles. There is also the question of internal chamber placement. The bent pyramid's dual chamber system may reflect uncertainty about burial location. The Great Pyramid contains a subterranean chamber, a queen's chamber, and a king's chamber, each at different elevations. Some scholars propose that these multiple chambers reflect evolving design during construction. If true, that would mean that even the Great Pyramid was not immune to mid-project revision. However, its internal layout appears more coherent than the bent pyramids. The Grand Gallery's precision and the carefully engineered relieving chambers suggest pre-planning rather than reactive improvisation. The bent pyramid also demonstrates the scale of resource commitment involved in experimentation. Constructing a pyramid that ultimately changes angle requires enormous material investment. Yet, Sneferu continued building. He did not retreat from ambition. He commissioned another pyramid nearby. This persistence indicates state confidence. It suggests that the Old Kingdom possessed sufficient resources and administrative stability to absorb setbacks. Such resilience forms part of the context in which Khufu's pyramid emerged. Archaeological studies of the bent pyramid's masonry reveal varying block sizes and construction techniques compared to later pyramids. Stones are laid in courses that adjust slightly as the angle shifts. This adaptability indicates that construction teams were capable of recalibrating under new directives. The experience gained at Dashur likely influenced the selection of the Giza plateau for Khufu's project. The bedrock at Giza provided a stable foundation. Levelling techniques may have been refined. Lessons about core masonry and casing stones would have been applied more systematically. It's also worth noting that the bent pyramid retains much of its original smooth casing stones, unlike the Great Pyramid. These polished limestone blocks demonstrate the intended aesthetic of a true pyramid. They show that even during experimentation, attention to finish and symbolism remained strong. In examining trial and error, one sees not failure but development. The bent pyramid's bend is a visible reminder that design evolves through correction. It reveals the human dimension of monumental architecture. Decisions were made, adjustments followed, knowledge accumulated. This perspective challenges the idea that the Great Pyramid appeared as an inexplicable leap. Instead, it stands at the end of a visible sequence. Imhotep initiated large-scale stone construction. Sneferu's reign tested smooth-sided geometry and structural limits. Khufu's project consolidated that experience. At the same time, the leap in precision at Giza still invites scrutiny. The Great Pyramid's alignment to cardinal directions is more accurate than earlier examples. Its base levelling surpasses previous efforts. The integration of massive granite beams in relieving chambers reflects advanced structural foresight. One might argue that such refinement is precisely what would be expected after trial and error. Engineers learn, they adjust. They aim higher once confidence grows. The bent pyramid's visible compromise becomes a stepping stone rather than a blemish. There is also a psychological dimension. Having witnessed structural stress firsthand, the architects serving Khufu would have approached design with caution. They would have calculated loads carefully. They would have considered angle choices with greater awareness of consequences. The concept of seeked may have been standardized further after Sneferu's experiments. If slope ratios were refined mathematically, future pyramids could be designed with predictable stability. Even without surviving documents from the 4th dynasty explicitly outlining these calculations, the physical evidence suggests systematic improvement. The bent pyramid also underscores the importance of material properties. Limestone quality, block size, and core construction methods all influence stability. Experience at Dashur would have informed quarry selection and block shaping at Giza. Thus, trial and error in stone becomes part of the narrative of authorship. The Great Pyramid's designer, whoever he was, inherited not a blank slate, but a set of practical lessons etched into Sneferu's monuments. He knew what worked. He knew what required adjustment. This continuity strengthens the case for internal Egyptian development rather than sudden outside intervention. The visible evolution from step to bent to red to great reveals a coherent trajectory. It demonstrates that the knowledge necessary for Giza's precision did not materialize without precedent. At the same time, the scale of Khufu's project pushed those lessons to their limit. Experimentation had to give way to calculated confidence. The margin for error shrank as height increased. Precision became non-negotiable. The bent pyramid stands today as a quiet teacher. Its change in angle captures a moment when ambition met reality and chose adaptation over collapse. That adaptation fed directly into the maturity of design seen at Giza. Understanding this progression clarifies the context in which the Great Pyramid's design was conceived. It was not a sudden spark in the dark. It was the product of accumulated experience, structural correction, and disciplined refinement. The architects who served Khufu did not begin from ignorance. They began from stone lessons already learned. Stand at the base of the Great Pyramid and the first impression is scale. The second, if you begin to measure, is precision. The structure does not merely appear large, it appears deliberate to a degree that unsettles casual explanation. Its base extends roughly 230.3 meters on each side. The difference between the longest and shortest sides is only a few centimeters. For a monument constructed over 4,500 years ago, that level of consistency draws attention. The base is also astonishingly level. Surveys have shown that the foundation varies by only a couple of centimeters across the entire footprint. Achieving such flatness over an area exceeding 5 hectares is not a minor accomplishment. It requires systematic levelling techniques and careful verification during preparation of the bedrock. Then there is alignment. The Great Pyramid is oriented to true north with a deviation of approximately 3 to 4 arc minutes. That is less than 1/10 of a degree. In practical terms, it is more accurately aligned than many medieval European cathedrals and even some early modern structures. This alignment was achieved without magnetic compasses, which did not exist in Egypt at the time. When numbers like these are presented, they can sound almost too neat. That reaction fuels what might be called the precision problem. Are these measurements too perfect to be accidental? If so, what level of knowledge was required to achieve them? One must begin with the understanding that ancient builders were not guessing. They were measuring. The Egyptian cubit, divided into palms and fingers, was a standardized unit. Cubit rods carved in stone have survived, demonstrating consistent measurement systems. Precision in construction requires standardization, and Egypt possessed it. Levelling the base likely involved cutting channels into the bedrock and filling them with water. Water naturally finds level. By observing the waterline along these channels, workers could mark high points and remove excess stone until the surface evened out. This method does not require advanced technology. It requires patience and repetition. Alignment to cardinal directions may have been achieved through astronomical observation. One widely supported method involves observing the simultaneous transit of 2 circumpolar stars across the meridian. By marking the vertical alignment of these stars at specific moments, surveyors could establish true north with remarkable accuracy. Such a method demands clear skies, trained observers, and repeated measurements over several nights. It also demands discipline. Slight observational errors would accumulate if not corrected. The precision of the pyramid's alignment suggests that multiple observations were averaged to refine accuracy. The geometry of the pyramid itself raises further questions. The angle of inclination, approximately 51.5 degrees, produces a height-to-base ratio that has intrigued researchers. Some have noted that the pyramid's perimeter divided by twice its height approximates the value of pi. Others argue that this relationship is coincidental, arising naturally from practical slope ratios. The concept of seked, used in later Egyptian texts to describe pyramid slope, defines the horizontal run for each cubit of vertical rise. If the Great Pyramid was designed using a sect of 5.5 palms, the resulting angle aligns closely with the measured slope. This explanation grounds the geometry in known Egyptian measurement systems rather than abstract mathematical constants. Still, the near-perfect squareness of the base demands attention. Establishing a right angle across such distances without modern tools requires careful surveying. One method involves the 3-4-5 triangle, known in many ancient cultures. By measuring 3 units along one axis and 4 along another, then confirming that the diagonal measures 5 units, a right angle can be established. Repeating and scaling this method would allow builders to lay out large squares. There is also the possibility that builders created a perimeter trench outlining the base before raising the structure. By ensuring the trench was square and level, they could build upward with confidence that the foundation was true. Small errors at the base would have been magnified at the apex. The limited deviation suggests that correction occurred early rather than late. The internal passages exhibit similar precision. The descending passage maintains a consistent slope over a considerable length. The grand gallery rises at a steady angle. The king's chamber is constructed with granite blocks fitted closely enough that even today, a sheet of paper cannot easily slip between them. Such tight fitting invites speculation about advanced machining, yet close examination shows tool marks consistent with copper chisels and stone pounding techniques. Precision does not require laser-guided cutting. It requires time and careful finishing. Critics of the conventional explanation often argue that such precision would be impossible without modern instruments. However, experimental archaeology provides counterexamples. Teams using replica ancient tools have demonstrated that accurate right angles, flat surfaces and consistent slopes can be achieved through patient manual work. Precision is also a function of scale. When constructing millions of blocks, minor variations can average out. If each course is adjusted carefully, cumulative error can be minimized. The pyramid's design may have incorporated tolerance thresholds, allowing builders to correct slight deviations before they became significant. The precision problem becomes more compelling when combined with the pyramid's durability. It has endured seismic activity, erosion and human intervention for millennia. Its structural integrity suggests that load calculations, even if intuitive rather than formally written, were effective. The relieving chambers above the king's chamber are particularly revealing. 5 stacked chambers capped with granite beams distribute the immense weight of the pyramid above. This solution anticipates compressive forces. It reflects understanding of stress redirection. It is unlikely to have been an accidental innovation. Some propose that the pyramid's precision reflects lost advanced knowledge inherited from a previous civilization. Yet such arguments often underestimate the capacity of disciplined observation and incremental learning. The progression from the bent pyramid to the red pyramid to the Great Pyramid shows visible improvement. That improvement explains precision without invoking vanished superscience. It is also important to recognize that perfection is relative. While the pyramid's measurements are impressively accurate, they are not flawless. There are minor irregularities in block placement. Some courses deviate slightly. The apex stone is missing, preventing exact measurement of final height. Precision exists within a human margin of error. Still, the overall coherence is undeniable. The base alignment, the levelling, the consistent slope, and the integration of internal chambers all converge to create an impression of intentional mastery. The precision problem thus refines the central question. It does not necessarily suggest unknown technology. It suggests disciplined methodology. Someone had to oversee measurement procedures. Someone had to verify alignment repeatedly. Someone had to ensure that work crews followed standardized instructions. This returns attention to design leadership. precision does not emerge spontaneously from uncoordinated labour. It requires centralised control and clear communication. The architect, whether an individual or a small council, must have defined standards and enforced them. Even the quarrying of limestone blocks likely followed systematic sizing guidelines. Uniform block dimensions simplify stacking and alignment. While individual blocks vary, the general consistency indicates planning rather than random extraction. Another dimension to consider is time. Construction likely spanned approximately 20 years. That duration allows for gradual refinement. Early courses could be inspected and corrected before later layers were added. Precision is easier to maintain when pace is controlled and oversight continuous. The precision problem also invites reflection on cultural motivation. Why pursue such accuracy? A tomb need not be aligned within minutes of arc to function as burial space. The drive toward exact cardinal orientation and smooth geometry reflects symbolic intent. The pyramid embodied cosmic order. Precision may have been considered a sacred duty rather than a practical necessity. If so, then the architect's role expanded beyond engineering. He was guardian of symbolic harmony. Alignment to true north may have represented alignment with the eternal order of the heavens. Squareness and levelness embodied stability and balance. In that light, precision becomes an expression of worldview rather than technological anomaly. It reveals a society deeply concerned with order. That concern would have motivated careful measurement and verification. Still, when modern surveyors confirm the pyramid's alignment with instruments far more advanced than ancient tools, the achievement remains impressive. It challenges assumptions about ancient limitations. It demands respect for observational skill. The precision problem, therefore, does not undermine the official account. It strengthens appreciation for the architects of the Old Kingdom. It highlights their capacity to integrate astronomy, geometry and logistics into a coherent plan, yet admiration alone does not answer the question of who held that plan in mind. Precision suggests leadership. It suggests oversight. It suggests someone understood the full geometry before the first course was laid. As the inquiry continues, attention naturally turns toward the mathematical principles embedded in the pyramid's proportions. Whether those principles reflect deliberate encoding of cosmic ratios or practical slope conventions, they deepen the investigation into the intellectual framework guiding its design. The Great Pyramid does not advertise equations. It does not display numbers carved into its casing stones. There are no visible formulas etched into its corridors. And yet, when measured carefully, the monument begins to speak in ratios. Its base, averaging about 230.3 metres per side, combined with its original height of approximately 146.6 metres, produces proportions that have fascinated mathematicians and historians alike. The slope angle of about 51.5 degrees is neither arbitrary nor extreme. It sits within a range that balances vertical ambition and structural stability. But it is the relationships between dimensions that continue to invite scrutiny. One of the most frequently discussed observations is the relationship between the pyramid's perimeter and its height. If one takes the perimeter of the base and divides it by twice the height, the result approximates the value of pi, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. The closeness of this approximation has led some to argue that the builders intentionally encoded knowledge of pi into the structure. However, caution is necessary. Pi is not an obscure number. Any time a circular concept intersects with geometry, pi appears naturally. If the pyramid's slope was defined by a Seked ratio, and that ratio produced a specific height relative to the base, the appearance of pi may be a byproduct rather than a deliberate inclusion. The Egyptian concept of Seked, preserved in later mathematical papyri, describes the horizontal displacement for each cubit of vertical rise. For example, a Seked of 5.5 palms per cubit produces an angle close to that of the Great Pyramid. This practical method allowed builders to maintain consistent slopes without requiring abstract trigonometric functions. When translated into modern measurement, the seeked method appears geometric and elegant. But for the ancient builders, it was likely practical and repeatable. Lay a cubit vertically, measure 5.5 palms horizontally, and repeat the ratio upward. Geometry emerges through consistency. Another observation concerns the ratio between the pyramid's slant height and half its base. Some have noted that this ratio approximates the golden ratio, approximately 1.618. The golden ratio appears frequently in geometry, art and natural growth patterns. Whether its presence in the Great Pyramid is intentional or coincidental remains debated. If one calculates the slant height using the known dimensions, the result does approximate the golden ratio relative to half the base. However, this could arise naturally from the chosen slope. If the sect defined the angle, and the angle determined the slant height, then the golden ratio relationship may be incidental. It is important to distinguish between deliberate encoding and emergent property. Geometry is interconnected. Choosing one ratio often produces secondary relationships. The question is whether the builders consciously sought those relationships, or whether they emerge from practical slope decisions. Ancient Egyptian mathematics, as preserved in later documents like the Rind mathematical papyrus and the Moscow mathematical papyrus, shows competence in area and volume calculation. These texts include problems related to the volume of truncated pyramids and the calculation of slopes. While these papyri date centuries after Khufu, they reflect traditions likely older. The ability to calculate the area of a circle using an approximation of pi appears in Egyptian mathematics. The Rind papyrus approximates the area of a circle by using a formula equivalent to pi around 3.16, slightly higher than the modern value of approximately 3.1416. This suggests that Egyptians had a working approximation of circular ratios. If so, the appearance of pi-like relationships in the Great Pyramid may not be surprising. However, there is no direct evidence that the builders intended to encode pi explicitly. It may simply reflect geometric consistency in large-scale construction. The internal geometry of the pyramid also invites attention. The ascending passage maintains a steady angle of about 26 degrees. The Grand Gallery rises at approximately the same angle as the pyramid's faces, around 51.5 degrees. The dimensions of the King's Chamber follow consistent cubit-based measurements. The King's Chamber measures roughly 10 by 20 royal cubits, with a height of approximately 11 cubits. These numbers suggest modular planning. Rather than arbitrary measurements, the chamber follows a standardized unit system. Granite beams above the King's Chamber are arranged to distribute weight effectively. The relieving chambers demonstrate not only structural foresight but geometric planning. Each layer reduces pressure on the chamber below by redirecting force outward. When examining the pyramid's base alignment, one must consider not only cardinal direction but squareness. The difference between diagonals is minimal, indicating that right angles were established with care. Establishing a square of that scale requires either precise rope stretching techniques or repeated verification using geometric principles. One plausible method involves marking a baseline aligned to north-south, then using the 3-4-5 triangle to establish perpendicular east-west lines. By extending these lines outward and verifying diagonal equality, surveyors could achieve near-perfect squareness. The levelling of the base, as mentioned earlier, may have involved water channels. Once level was achieved, corner markers could define the square's vertices. These foundational decisions determine the entire structure's accuracy. There is also the matter of orientation relative to the Earth's curvature. The pyramid's base is so large that curvature becomes measurable. While there is no evidence that ancient Egyptians calculated Earth curvature explicitly, the consistency of levelling across such a distance suggests meticulous measurement. Some have speculated that the pyramid encodes astronomical distances, such as scaling the Earth-Sun distance into its height. Such claims are generally unsupported by mainstream scholarship. They often rely on selective scaling factors chosen after the fact. While intriguing, they lack clear evidence of intentional design. It is more grounded to consider the pyramid as an expression of applied geometry, within known Egyptian measurement systems. Cubits, palms, and fingers provided a consistent framework. Slope ratios ensured structural stability. Alignment to cardinal directions embedded cosmic symbolism. The geometry of the pyramid's faces also affects visual perception. The slight concavity observed in each face, subtle but measurable, may have been intentional. Some researchers propose that this concavity enhanced structural stability or improved visual appearance under sunlight. Others argue it is a result of settling or construction technique. If intentional, such concavity would reflect sophisticated geometric awareness. Even if unintentional, its presence adds another layer of complexity to the monument's design. The integration of internal and external geometry suggests holistic planning. The angle of the outer faces aligns with the slope of the grand gallery. The vertical axis of the pyramid intersects key chambers. This coherence implies that geometry was not confined to the exterior but governed the entire structure. One cannot ignore the symbolic dimension of geometry in Egyptian culture. Order, balance, and proportion were associated with Ma'at, the principle of cosmic harmony. Constructing a monument with precise proportions may have been considered a reflection of maintaining that harmony. Thus, mathematics in limestone becomes not merely technical but ideological. The architect, whoever he was, would have understood that geometry served both practical and spiritual ends. The question remains whether the Great Pyramid represents the peak of Egyptian mathematical expression, or simply the most visible one. Later pyramids did not consistently replicate its precision. This could reflect economic decline, shifting priorities, or loss of centralized control rather than loss of knowledge. The presence of geometric sophistication does not demand lost civilizations. It demands recognition of disciplined measurement and long-term observation. Egyptian society had centuries to refine techniques before Khufu's reign. Even so, the elegance of the pyramid's proportions continues to inspire fascination. When modern engineers calculate its dimensions and discover familiar ratios, it creates a sense of continuity across millennia. Geometry becomes a bridge between ancient and modern minds, yet caution remains necessary. Patterns can emerge from coincidence. Humans are predisposed to find meaning in numbers. Without written testimony from the builders explicitly stating their intentions, interpretation must remain measured. What can be stated with confidence is that the Great Pyramid reflects systematic geometric planning. Its dimensions follow consistent units. Its slopes align with practical Sekid ratios. Its alignment to cardinal directions reflects astronomical awareness. Its internal chambers exhibit proportional coherence. The mathematics hidden within the structure does not shout. It resides quietly in measurements that reward careful study. Whether those relationships were intended as cosmic encoding or practical necessity, they reveal minds comfortable with geometry on a monumental scale. Understanding who really designed the Great Pyramid requires acknowledging that such geometry did not appear spontaneously. It was conceived, measured, and implemented. It required surveyors capable of aligning stars, scribes capable of recording cubits, and overseers capable of maintaining consistency across millions of stones. As exploration continues, attention naturally turns from geometry to the sky itself. Alignment to the heavens suggests that the pyramid's design may have been shaped not only by mathematics, but by astronomical intention. The Great Pyramid does not stand randomly upon the Giza plateau. Its sides face north, south, east, and west with a precision that exceeds practical necessity for a tomb. That fact alone directs attention upward. Alignment on this scale suggests deliberate astronomical consideration rather than simple orientation for convenience. The north face of the pyramid deviates from true north by only a few arc minutes. Such accuracy cannot be explained by rough estimation or casual observation. It implies repeated measurements, likely taken at night when stars provide stable reference points. The Egyptians of the Old Kingdom were not casual sky watchers. Their calendar, Agricultural cycles and religious ceremonies depended on celestial patterns. Astronomy was integrated into daily life and state function. To understand how alignment may have been achieved, one must consider the sky as it appeared around 2600 BCE. The Earth's axis slowly precesses over thousands of years, altering the position of stars relative to true north. Today, Polaris marks the north celestial pole closely. In Khufu's time, Polaris was not the pole star. Instead, a pair of circumpolar stars in Ursa Major and Ursa Minor passed close to the pole at predictable intervals. One widely supported theory suggests that Egyptian surveyors used the simultaneous transit method. By observing when two circumpolar stars aligned vertically, one directly above the other, they could establish a true north-south line. This method does not require advanced instruments. It requires a plumb line, a sighting rod, and disciplined observation across multiple nights. Repeated observations would reduce error. Marking the ground beneath the vertical alignment of stars provides a meridian. Once north-south was established, perpendicular lines could be drawn to define east and west. The pyramid's base could then be laid out according to those axes. Such a procedure implies not only astronomical awareness but institutional knowledge. Surveyors would need training, observations would need verification. The importance of correct alignment would have been emphasized, not treated as optional refinement. Why would alignment matter so much? In Egyptian cosmology, the circumpolar stars, known as the imperishable ones, never set below the horizon. They symbolized eternity. The pharaoh's soul was believed to ascend to join these stars. Aligning the pyramid precisely with the cardinal directions may have been understood as aligning the king with the eternal heavens. The narrow shafts extending from the king's chamber and queen's chamber have further fueled astronomical interpretation. The southern shaft from the king's chamber points toward the region of Orion's belt as it appeared during Khufu's era. Orion was associated with Osiris, the god of rebirth and afterlife. The northern shaft may have aligned with circumpolar stars. These alignments suggest intentional orientation towards celestial targets. However, caution remains necessary. The shafts are narrow and angled slightly upward. Their exact purpose remains debated. They may have served symbolic rather than functional astronomical roles. Even if they pointed towards specific stars, that does not require advanced astrophysics. It requires observation and symbolic intent. Egyptian priests maintained detailed calendars based on the heliacal rising of Sirius, which signalled the annual Nile flood. This demonstrates systematic sky monitoring. Knowledge of stellar cycles was embedded in temple practice. It is reasonable to conclude that astronomical alignment for royal monuments fell within their capability. The pyramid's east-west alignment also carries symbolic weight. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. The west was associated with the land of the dead. The pyramid complex includes mortuary temples positioned on the eastern side, where daily rituals were performed. The alignment integrates solar movement into architectural design. During the 4th dynasty, solar theology gained prominence. Later kings of the 5th dynasty explicitly identified themselves as sons of Ra, the sun god. While Khufu's inscriptions are sparse, the increasing importance of solar symbolism suggests that alignment to the sun's path was not incidental. The pyramid's faces catch sunlight differently throughout the day. At sunrise and sunset, shadows emphasize the edges. The smooth casing stones, now mostly removed, would have reflected sunlight brilliantly. The monument may have appeared as a radiant geometric form under the desert sky. Alignment with the heavens thus becomes part of a broader symbolic framework. It reflects a world-view in which earthly order mirrors celestial order. Constructing a perfectly oriented pyramid could be seen as participating in cosmic stability. It is important to address claims that the pyramid aligns with specific star maps or encodes detailed astronomical charts. Some have proposed correlations between the 3 pyramids at Giza and the 3 stars of Orion's belt. While the visual resemblance is intriguing, precise measurement shows discrepancies in scale and orientation. Most mainstream scholars consider the correlation coincidental rather than exact. Astronomy in the Old Kingdom was observational rather than theoretical. Egyptian records do not demonstrate knowledge of planetary motion in the way later Greek astronomers did. Their focus lay in practical calendrical cycles and symbolic stellar associations. That practical focus supports the idea that alignment was achievable without exotic technology. The sky provided stable reference points. The desert provided clear horizons. Observations repeated over months would refine measurements. Precession of the equinoxes offers an additional clue. By calculating the slight deviation of the pyramid's alignment from true north and accounting for precessional movement, some researchers have estimated construction dates consistent with Khufu's reign. This reinforces the idea that alignment was determined astronomically rather than through inherited advanced instruments. The question then becomes whether the alignment was intended primarily for symbolic reasons or whether it served practical surveying needs. Establishing a north-south axis simplifies geometric layout. Once a meridian is fixed, right angles follow naturally. Practicality and symbolism need not be separated. They can reinforce each other. Inside the pyramid, the descending passage also aligns closely with true north. It slopes downward at about 26 degrees. Its orientation suggests deliberate positioning rather than casual excavation. Even subterranean features follow the external alignment scheme. The cumulative evidence indicates intentional astronomical design. It does not indicate knowledge beyond what careful observation could provide. It suggests a culture comfortable integrating sky and stone. Alignment also requires temporal coordination. Observing specific star transits depends on timekeeping. Egyptian priests maintained water clocks and shadow clocks. While these devices were not precise by modern standards, they allowed measurement of intervals sufficient for astronomical observation. One must imagine a small team of surveyors standing under the night sky, marking points in the sand as stars passed overhead. Their tools were simple, but their discipline was rigorous. Over time, lines drawn in sand became grooves cut into bedrock. The alignment of the pyramid to true north is more accurate than many later pyramids. This raises the possibility that Khufu's architect applied astronomical methods with particular care. Whether motivated by symbolic reverence or technical ambition, they achieved remarkable precision. It is also possible that specific ceremonial events were tied to celestial positions during construction. Foundation rituals in Egyptian culture were significant. The act of stretching the cord was both symbolic and practical. Priests may have participated alongside surveyors, merging ritual and measurement. This blending of roles complicates modern distinctions between architect and astronomer. In the Old Kingdom, these functions likely overlapped. Knowledge of the heavens informed design decisions. The designer needed to understand celestial cycles as well as structural loads. The pyramid's location on the Giza plateau may also reflect astronomical considerations. Its position relative to the Nile and to the horizon offers unobstructed sky views. The plateau's elevation provides a stable vantage point. Some researchers have examined whether the pyramid aligns with equinox, sunrise, or sunset points. Evidence suggests that while cardinal alignment is precise, equinox alignment is less exact. The primary orientation appears north-south rather than seasonally specific. The broader pattern remains clear. The Great Pyramid is not randomly oriented. Its axes correspond to cosmic reference points. Its internal shaft suggests stellar symbolism. Its overall geometry interacts with sunlight in predictable ways. This alignment contributes to the precision problem discussed earlier. Achieving accurate orientation requires careful measurement. The astronomical component reinforces the argument that design was intentional and systematic. It also reinforces the cultural dimension. Alignment was not only a matter of technical pride, it expressed world view. The pharaoh's tomb was positioned within a cosmic grid. earth and sky were brought into geometric harmony. Such harmony required foresight before construction began. The foundation had to be aligned correctly from the outset. Correcting misalignment later would have been nearly impossible once courses were laid. This further supports the idea that astronomical planning preceded large-scale building. The integration of astronomy into architecture deepens the portrait of Old Kingdom builders. They were not merely stonecutters, they were observers of the sky. They understood cyclical time and cardinal space. They embedded that understanding into monumental form. Still, alignment does not require advanced telescopes or lost knowledge. It requires patience and method. Desert nights provide clarity. Stars move predictably. Repeated observation over years yields reliable reference. The evidence thus supports intentional astronomical design within known Egyptian capabilities. It strengthens the case for a culturally grounded explanation rather than external intervention. At the same time, alignment amplifies the central question of authorship. Someone decided that cardinal orientation was essential. Someone supervised the observations. Someone translated celestial lines into ground markers. As the inquiry moves from sky to workforce, the focus shifts from celestial planning to human coordination. Aligning with the heavens was only the first step. Translating that alignment into millions of placed stones required disciplined labour, guided by a shared design vision. When people imagine the construction of the Great Pyramid, the first image that often appears is one of endless lines of exhausted men dragging enormous stones under the lash of overseers. That image has lingered for centuries, reinforced by early interpretations and dramatic storytelling. It is powerful, but it is incomplete. The workforce question sits at the centre of the design mystery. If the pyramid was conceived with such precision, who carried that precision into reality? Was it simply brute labour directed from above? Or was the workforce itself composed of skilled individuals capable of understanding and executing complex instructions? Archaeology has reshaped this discussion significantly over the past few decades. Excavations at Giza, particularly in the area known as Hayt el Ghurab, have uncovered what appears to be a workers' village. This settlement contained barrack-style housing, bakeries, breweries, and administrative buildings. It was not a temporary camp of chained slaves. It was an organised community. Animal bones discovered at the site indicate that workers consumed beef, sheep, and fish regularly. This was not starvation fare. It suggests that labourers were provisioned with substantial rations. Such provisioning would require logistical planning and centralised management. The workforce likely consisted of rotating crews drawn from across Egypt during the annual Nile flood. When the floodwaters covered agricultural fields, farmers could not work their land. That period provided available manpower. The state could mobilise labour without permanently disrupting agriculture. Estimates of workforce size vary, but many Egyptologists now suggest numbers between 20,000 and 30,000 workers, operating in rotating shifts rather than 100,000 enslaved individuals labouring continuously. If construction lasted roughly 20 years, such numbers become plausible within Egypt's population capacity at the time. However, labourers alone do not explain precision. Carrying stone from quarry to foundation is one task. Aligning those stones within tight tolerances is another. The workforce must have included multiple layers of expertise. Quarry workers needed knowledge of limestone extraction. They used copper chisels, wooden wedges, and pounding stones to detach blocks from bedrock. Transport crews required skill in moving heavy loads using sledges and lubrication techniques, possibly with water poured over sand to reduce friction. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that wet sand significantly decreases resistance under sled runners. Placement crews needed understanding of levelling and alignment. Blocks were not simply stacked. They were positioned to maintain slope consistency and corner accuracy. Slight deviations would accumulate rapidly if unchecked. Above these crews stood overseers. Titles such as Overseer of the Royal Works or Inspector of Craftsmen appear in tomb inscriptions. These officials likely coordinated teams, monitored progress, and ensured adherence to design specifications. Graffiti found within the Great Pyramid's relieving chambers include names of work gangs such as the Friends of Khufu. These inscriptions were not meant for public display. They appear to have been left by crews during construction. Their presence humanizes the workforce. It reveals organization into identifiable units with pride in their association with the king. Such organization implies internal structure. Each gang may have been divided into smaller groups, each responsible for specific tasks. Rotational scheduling would prevent exhaustion. Food distribution systems ensured energy supply. The pyramid's scale required not only physical strength, but administrative efficiency. Stone deliveries from Tura had to be synchronized with quarrying at Giza. Granite from Aswan had to arrive at specific stages. Without coordination, bottlenecks would halt progress. Engineers, in the ancient sense of practical problem solvers, were embedded within this system. They were not isolated geniuses, but state officials with technical competence. Their role was to translate abstract design into operational steps. The workforce question also intersects with the precision problem discussed earlier. Maintaining alignment over millions of blocks requires continuous verification. Surveyors likely rechecked edges and corners regularly. Any shift detected would need correction before additional courses were added. This suggests that the workforce was not simply labouring blindly. At least some members possessed understanding of geometric standards. They may not have known the full cosmological symbolism of the structure, but they understood the measurements required for their tasks. Another layer of specialization emerges in stone finishing. The casing stones, originally polished smooth, fit together with remarkable tightness. Achieving such finishing demands skill beyond brute force. Craftsmen responsible for casing likely worked with careful measurement and fine chiselling. The internal granite blocks of the king's chamber also demonstrate precision fitting. Granite is harder than limestone. Shaping and positioning such blocks required expertise. Even today, moving multi-ton granite beams poses challenges. The ancient crews managed it using sledges, ramps, and coordinated manpower. The ramp question remains debated. Various models propose straight ramps, zigzagging ramps, or internal spiral ramps. Regardless of configuration, ramp construction itself would have required engineering planning. The workforce had to build not only the pyramid, but the infrastructure enabling its construction. In examining this system, it becomes clear that the Great Pyramid was not built by anonymous masses alone. It was built by a layered workforce: labourers, craftsmen, surveyors, overseers, administrators, and architects. Each layer contributed to the final precision. The notion of slave labour largely stems from later Greek accounts, particularly Herodotus, who wrote centuries after the pyramids were built. Modern archaeological evidence contradicts the idea of massive slave populations driving construction. Instead, evidence supports a corvée labour system, a form of national service. This distinction matters when considering design intent. A workforce composed entirely of coerced slaves may execute tasks, but is less likely to maintain high morale or precision. A workforce organised as a national project, supported and provisioned, may take pride in participation. The pyramid thus becomes not only a royal monument but a collective endeavour. That collective nature does not erase individual leadership. It contextualizes it. The designer's vision required implementation through organised human effort. There is also evidence of medical care at the workers' village. Skeletal remains show healed fractures, suggesting that injured workers received treatment rather than being discarded. This further supports the idea of an invested state workforce, rather than expendable slaves. The workforce question sometimes leads to more speculative interpretations. Some suggest that precision implies assistance beyond known human capability. Yet archaeological evidence consistently points to human labour and human organisation. Nothing in the record demands external intervention. What remains impressive is not mysterious technology, but logistical mastery. Coordinating thousands of workers, ensuring steady food supply, Maintaining morale and adhering to design standards over decades requires sophisticated administration. Such administration reflects the strength of the Old Kingdom state. Khufu's reign occurred during a period of centralized authority and economic stability. Taxation and resource collection supported large-scale projects. Without political cohesion, such undertakings would falter. The workforce question also reinforces the idea that design was not separate from execution. The architect had to consider labour capacity when planning slope and block size. A design too ambitious for available manpower would stall. This interplay between design and workforce capacity likely shaped the Great Pyramid's final form. Lessons from Sneferu's experiments informed decisions about slope angle and structural reinforcement. Workforce efficiency informed scheduling and block standardization. Understanding the workforce does not diminish the monument's grandeur. It clarifies it. The pyramid stands not only as a testament to a king's ambition, but as evidence of coordinated human effort guided by shared purpose. At the top of that coordinated effort stood individuals responsible for ensuring that design intentions translated into stone reality. The architect's role depended on the workforce's competence. The workforce's success depended on clear design guidance. The Great Pyramid therefore emerges as a convergence of vision and labour. It required both. Precision without manpower remains theory. Manpower without precision becomes chaos. The design question cannot be separated from the human infrastructure that made it tangible. As the investigation continues, attention shifts naturally toward the tools themselves. If the workforce possessed skill and organisation, what instruments did they use to transform limestone and granite into precise architectural elements? The Great Pyramid inspires a particular kind of disbelief when one considers the tools available at the time. No iron, no steel, no cranes powered by engines, no diamond-tipped saws. The Old Kingdom builders worked primarily with copper, stone, wood, rope and human coordination. On the surface, this toolkit appears insufficient for shaping millions of limestone blocks and dozens of massive granite beams with the precision we observe today. This tension between tool simplicity and architectural achievement fuels many alternative theories. The question is direct. Could copper and stone really achieve this? To answer it, one must begin by separating two materials used in the Great Pyramid, limestone and granite. The bulk of the pyramid consists of locally quarried limestone. Limestone is relatively soft compared to granite. On the Mohs hardness scale, limestone ranks around 3 to 4, while copper ranks slightly higher. This means copper tools, when sharpened and maintained, can cut and shape limestone effectively. Archaeological evidence supports this. Copper chisels, saws and drills have been found in Old Kingdom contexts. Tomb reliefs depict workers carving stone blocks. Limestone quarries at Giza show clear tool marks consistent with copper chiselling and stone pounding techniques. The more challenging material is granite. The King's Chamber and its relieving chambers contain granite blocks transported from Aswan. Granite ranks around 6 to 7 on the Mohs scale, significantly harder than copper. At first glance, this seems to create a contradiction. How could softer copper tools shape harder granite? The answer lies in abrasion. Copper tools were not relied upon alone. Workers used dolerite pounding stones to break granite from quarry walls. Dolerite is harder than granite. By repeatedly striking the stone surface with heavy dolerite balls, workers could fracture and rough-shape blocks. For finer shaping, copper saws and drills were used in combination with abrasive sand. Sand, composed largely of quartz, is harder than granite. When placed between a copper blade and granite surface, sand acts as the cutting agent. The copper holds the abrasive in place. With patience and repetition, granite can be cut and smoothed. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated this process. Modern researchers using replica copper tools and sand abrasives have successfully cut and shaped granite blocks. The process is slow, but it is feasible. Speed is not the defining factor in ancient monumental construction. Time and manpower compensate for tool limitations. Drill cores found in Egypt show spiral grooves, suggesting tubular drilling methods. Some researchers have argued that these grooves indicate advanced machining. However, experiments show that rotating copper tubes with sand abrasive can produce similar marks. The grooves reflect incremental abrasion rather than high-speed drilling. One must also consider that not every block required perfect finishing. The outer casing stones demanded tight joints and smooth surfaces. Interior core blocks could be rougher. Precision was applied selectively where structural or aesthetic demands required it. Transporting blocks presented another challenge. Limestone blocks weighing 2 to 3 tons could be moved using sledges pulled by teams of workers. Reliefs from later periods depict water being poured on sand ahead of sledges to reduce friction. Modern tests confirm that wet sand reduces drag significantly. Granite beams weighing up to 60 tons required even more coordination. River transport along the Nile provided a natural highway from Aswan to Giza. Seasonal flooding allowed boats to approach construction sites via canals. Once offloaded, sledges and ramps facilitated movement to the building platform. Ramp construction remains debated. Straight ramps extending from ground level would require enormous material investment. Zigzagging or spiral ramps reduce material volume but complicate logistics. An internal ramp theory suggests that ramps were built within the pyramid's outer shell as construction rose. Regardless of ramp configuration, building ramps required additional tools and labour. Wooden levers may have assisted in lifting blocks incrementally. Evidence of levering techniques appears in unfinished obelisks and other monuments. The key insight is that copper and stone tools are not magical limitations.
They are slower than modern tools, but slowness does not equate to impossibility. When multiplied by thousands of workers and decades of construction, even modest tools achieve substantial results. There is also evidence that copper tools were periodically annealed. Heating copper restores its malleability after work hardening. Egyptian metalworkers understood basic metallurgical processes. They could reshape and resharpen tools as needed. The precision of casing stones sometimes surprises observers. Joints appear tight, surfaces seem flat. Yet close examination reveals minor variations. Blocks were fitted through repeated adjustment rather than instantaneous perfection. The Great Pyramid's core masonry differs from the outer casing. Core blocks vary in size and shape, fitted together in courses. Precision increases toward the exterior. This layered approach optimizes effort. Fine finishing is applied where visible or structurally critical. Critics sometimes argue that tool marks on certain granite blocks appear too precise for copper and sand methods. However, detailed analysis of those marks often shows irregularities consistent with manual abrasion rather than machine cutting. One must also consider the cumulative knowledge inherited from earlier projects. The Bent Pyramid and Red Pyramid served as training grounds. By Khufu's reign, craftsmen had decades of experience shaping stone at large scale. Skill improves with repetition.
It is important to recognise that ancient tools were not crude in the sense of careless. They were simple but effective. Copper chisels could be shaped into narrow or broad edges. Saws could be long and flexible. Drills could be mounted on bow mechanisms to create rotational motion. In addition to tools, measurement devices played a critical role. Plumb bobs ensured vertical alignment. Squares ensured right angles. Cubit rods standardized dimensions. These instruments allowed builders to maintain consistency even without metal rulers or laser levels. The argument that advanced lost technology must explain the pyramid's precision often underestimates human patience. If shaping a granite beam required months of careful abrasion, and the state could allocate that time, the result would reflect that investment. There is also the matter of workforce specialization. Not every worker shaped granite. A smaller group of skilled craftsmen likely handled complex stone finishing. Their expertise would have been concentrated and refined. The notion that copper tools are too soft to cut granite overlooks the abrasive role of sand. The cutting agent is not the copper itself, but the harder quartz grains trapped between tool and stone. This principle is still used in certain modern cutting processes. Archaeological evidence from unfinished statues and quarries supports this explanation. In Aswan, the unfinished obelisk remains partially detached from bedrock, with dolerite pounding marks visible. These marks align with known ancient techniques. The tools of the time therefore appear sufficient when combined with time, labour and organisation. They do not require hidden machinery or extraterrestrial assistance. They require systematic application. Still, the scale of achievement remains impressive. Shaping millions of blocks with manual tools demands discipline. It demands supervision. It demands quality control. This brings the discussion back to design leadership. Tools enable execution, but they do not define geometry. Someone specified block dimensions. Someone determined slope ratios. Tools followed instruction. The absence of iron did not prevent architectural sophistication. Many ancient cultures achieved remarkable structures without steel. What matters is not the hardness of the tool alone, but the system within which it operates. Copper, stone, wood, rope and sand form the technological foundation of Old Kingdom construction. Within that framework, builders achieved alignment, levelling and structural stability that endure today. Recognizing this does not diminish wonder. It redirects it. The marvel lies not in secret machines, but in coordinated human effort guided by measured design. As the inquiry continues, attention shifts from tools and workforce toward what is missing from the historical record. If tools were adequate and labour organised, why do surviving texts remain so silent about the design process itself? For a monument that has endured more than 4 millennia, the Great Pyramid leaves surprisingly little written explanation behind it. There is no inscription on its walls announcing its purpose, no carved proclamation describing its construction, no detailed narrative from Khufu boasting of the methods used to raise it. The silence is striking. Later pyramids, particularly from the 5th and 6th dynasties, contain pyramid texts carved into their internal chambers. These texts outline spells and rituals meant to guide the king through the afterlife. Khufu's pyramid contains none of these inscriptions. Its interior is almost austere. Smooth granite walls, narrow passages, no decorative reliefs. This absence shapes interpretation. It raises a question that often splits into two directions. Did the knowledge of its design vanish over time, or was it simply never recorded in the way modern observers expect? Egypt was not a culture without writing. Hieroglyphs existed long before the Great Pyramid. Administrative papyri were used regularly. The Diary of Mera demonstrates that written documentation of logistics occurred during Khufu's reign. Scribes tracked shipments of stone and food. The state valued record keeping. Yet not all documents survive equally. Papyrus decays. Wooden tablets rot. Administrative archives are vulnerable to fire, moisture and political upheaval. Stone endures. That imbalance distorts the historical record. We inherit monuments but lose manuals. The absence of detailed construction texts may reflect this preservation bias rather than deliberate secrecy. Architectural plans may have existed on papyrus. They may have been archived in temple storehouses. Over centuries of invasion, abandonment and reuse of materials, such archives likely perished. There is also the matter of cultural priorities. Egyptian inscriptions typically focused on divine legitimacy, ritual accomplishment, and royal lineage. They celebrated outcomes rather than processes. A temple wall might depict the king smiting enemies or presenting offerings to gods, not supervising foundation trench measurements. Construction knowledge may have been treated as technical craft, not sacred proclamation. The audience for detailed building methods would have been limited to officials and craftsmen. Public inscriptions served symbolic purposes. The Great Pyramid's lack of internal decoration also reflects chronological development. The pyramid texts appear later during the 5th dynasty. Khufu's reign predates that textual tradition. The absence of inscriptions may simply indicate that funerary texts had not yet become standard within pyramids. This does not mean that ritual knowledge was absent. It may have been performed orally by priests. Oral transmission can be remarkably durable within structured traditions. However, oral knowledge leaves fewer archaeological traces. Some argue that the silence around design indicates lost advanced knowledge, perhaps inherited from a previous civilization and then forgotten. This idea appeals to imagination but lacks supporting evidence. The visible architectural progression from step pyramid to bent pyramid to red pyramid to great pyramid suggests continuity rather than abrupt inheritance. It is more plausible that knowledge was incremental and embedded in professional communities. Architects trained apprentices. Surveyors taught techniques to successors. Skills were preserved through practice rather than textbooks. One must also consider political dynamics. The Old Kingdom eventually collapsed into a period of decentralization known as the First Intermediate Period. Central authority weakened, resources shifted, monumental construction declined. Administrative continuity may have fractured. In such transitions, archives can be lost. Institutional memory can fragment. The absence of detailed building records from Khufu's time may reflect later disruption rather than original secrecy. There are fragments of inscriptions and graffiti that offer glimpses into construction culture. Work gang names written in hidden chambers reveal pride and organisation. Quarry marks indicate placement instructions. Yet these are operational traces, not design treatises. The silence becomes more pronounced when contrasted with the richness of material culture found in tombs of high officials. Statues, reliefs, and autobiographical inscriptions survive from many Old Kingdom elites. If a chief architect wished to commemorate his role, he might have done so in his own tomb. One candidate often mentioned is Hemiunu, a high-ranking official buried at Giza. His mastaba contained a statue and inscriptions describing his titles. However, no explicit reference to designing the Great Pyramid appears. If he was indeed the chief architect, he did not record it in surviving inscriptions. This absence may reflect modesty within cultural norms. It may reflect focus on titles rather than specific projects. It may also reflect the loss of portions of tomb inscriptions over time. Lost records are common in ancient history. The Library of Alexandria's destruction symbolises the fragility of written heritage. Countless papyri from Egypt's long history have not survived. Administrative details often fade, leaving monuments as primary evidence. When examining what texts do not tell us, one must avoid filling gaps with unfounded speculation. Silence invites imagination, but disciplined inquiry requires restraint. There are no ancient Egyptian texts claiming extraterrestrial assistance. No references to Atlantean inheritance. No preserved blueprints carved into secret chambers. The absence of explanation is not evidence of hidden origin. It is evidence of the limits of preservation. At the same time, acknowledging lost records does not diminish mystery. It reminds us that our understanding is partial. Archaeology reconstructs from fragments. Interpretations evolve as new evidence emerges. The diary of Mira was discovered only recently. Its survival was accidental, preserved in a remote harbour context. If one such administrative document survived, others may once have existed. Their absence today reflects chance as much as history. The Old Kingdom bureaucracy likely produced reports, design outlines, and correspondence related to major projects. These documents served immediate operational needs. They were not designed for eternity. The pyramid itself may have been intended as the enduring statement. Its stone form embodied royal legitimacy and cosmic order. The process of building, though complex, was a means to that end. Some have speculated that secret knowledge was guarded by priestly elites and intentionally withheld from public record. While priesthood certainly controlled ritual knowledge, there is no evidence of systematic concealment of engineering methods. Egyptian culture was hierarchical but not conspiratorial in the modern sense. Technical knowledge was valuable, but its survival depended on institutional stability rather than secrecy. The silence surrounding design details therefore points toward lost records rather than lost science. The tools, workforce organisation, and architectural progression are visible. What is missing are the intermediate documents explaining decisions step by step. This missing layer challenges historians to reconstruct from physical evidence. Measuring slopes, analysing tool marks, studying quarry sites, and comparing contemporaneous monuments provide indirect insight into design methods. In some ways, the absence of explicit texts invites deeper engagement with the structure itself. The pyramid becomes the document. Its angles are paragraphs, its chambers are footnotes, its alignment is a margin note pointing north. Even so, the human desire for named authorship persists. We seek the architect's signature, the moment of inspiration, the detailed drawing that once existed. That search may never yield a complete answer. Lost records do not imply ignorance. They reflect the fragility of writing materials and the selective survival of history. The Great Pyramid stands because it was built of stone. Its blueprints, if written on papyrus, did not share that durability. As the investigation continues, attention shifts toward other monuments and artifacts that display comparable precision. If similar techniques appear elsewhere, they reinforce continuity. If anomalies arise, they invite comparison. The Serapeum at Saqqara, with its massive granite boxes, often enters such discussions. Examining those structures may shed further light on whether the precision seen at Giza was unique or part of a broader pattern within Egyptian engineering practice. If the Great Pyramid raises questions about precision, the Serapeum at Saqqara intensifies them in a different way. Deep beneath the desert surface, long corridors carved into bedrock contain massive granite boxes, each weighing dozens of tons. These boxes, often described as sarcophagi, are enormous, rectangular, and polished with a smoothness that surprises modern visitors. The Serapeum was built during the New Kingdom and later periods, long after the Great Pyramid. It served as the burial place of sacred Apis bulls, animals revered as manifestations of divine presence. Each bull, upon death, was interred within one of these granite chambers. The granite boxes themselves are the source of fascination. Some weigh upwards of 70 tons, including their lids. Their interior surfaces are flat and smooth. The corners appear sharply defined. Measurements taken by modern researchers show tight tolerances in certain areas. These qualities prompt comparison with the granite blocks inside the King's Chamber at Giza. The granite question arises naturally. If Old Kingdom builders used copper tools and abrasive sand to shape granite beams for the Great Pyramid, could later Egyptian craftsmen refine those techniques further? The Serapeum suggests that granite working skill did not disappear after Khufu's reign. It evolved. Granite is harder and more resistant than limestone. Its shaping requires patience and repetitive abrasion. In the Serapeum, the internal faces of some boxes appear remarkably flat. Critics argue that achieving such flatness without modern machinery would be nearly impossible. However, experiments show that flat surfaces can be achieved through consistent abrasion using harder materials and levelling techniques. Dolerite pounding stones were used in quarries to rough-shape granite. Copper saws with quartz sand abrasive could cut channels and refine surfaces. Repeated grinding with stone polishers and sand could produce smooth finishes. The process is slow but feasible when supported by organised labour and time. The presence of these granite boxes in the Serapeum does not necessarily imply unknown technology. It demonstrates cumulative expertise. By the New Kingdom, Egyptian craftsmen had centuries of experience shaping stone. Their methods were refined through repetition and adaptation. The tight tolerances sometimes cited in modern analyses often refer to specific measured points, rather than uniform perfection across entire surfaces. While some interior faces are impressively flat, slight irregularities exist upon closer inspection. The perception of machine-like precision can sometimes arise from selective measurement rather than comprehensive survey. There is also a psychological dimension. When standing inside a granite chamber carved thousands of years ago, the mind naturally searches for extraordinary explanations. The scale and weight of the material amplify that reaction.
Yet context matters. The Serapeum was built in a period when Egypt had established long-distance trade, advanced metallurgy compared to Old Kingdom standards, and continued quarrying experience. Iron tools were not yet widespread in early phases, but bronze tools, harder than pure copper, were available in later periods. Bronze contains tin, increasing hardness and durability. Even without bronze, the abrasive method remains valid. The cutting power lies in the quartz sand, not the copper blade. Copper serves as a holder for the abrasive. This principle applies equally to granite beams in the Great Pyramid and to granite boxes in the Serapeum. One must also consider that granite blocks in the King's Chamber weigh up to 60 tons. Transporting and placing them required skill. The Serapeum boxes demonstrate that Egyptians continued handling heavy granite pieces centuries later. The ability to move large stone objects did not vanish after the Fourth Dynasty. The granite question sometimes extends beyond cutting and shaping to suggest lost high-speed drilling or advanced machinery. Drill cores found in Egypt show spiral patterns. Some researchers interpret these as evidence of rapid rotary drilling. However, experimental archaeology shows that bow-driven drills, combined with abrasive slurry, can create similar patterns over extended periods. The key factor is not speed but repetition. Ancient craftsmen did not face modern project deadlines.
Monumental construction often spanned decades. When labour is abundant and time is not constrained by industrial economics, slow processes accumulate impressive results. The Serapeum also demonstrates that precise stone fitting was not unique to the Great Pyramid. Egyptian craftsmen consistently produced tight joints in temples, obelisks and statues. The precision observed at Giza reflects a broader tradition of stone mastery, rather than isolated anomaly. Still, the scale of the Serapeum boxes invites careful analysis. The interior cavities are large and uniform. Removing such volume from solid granite requires organised effort. It suggests workshops dedicated to heavy stone shaping. Work marks visible in the Serapeum corridors align with known Egyptian quarry techniques. There are no traces of advanced cutting tools beyond what is archaeologically attested. The absence of iron tool marks from the relevant periods reinforces the abrasive method explanation. It is also important to note chronological difference. The Serapeum's most impressive granite boxes date from the New Kingdom, and later, roughly 1,000 years after Khufu. Comparing them directly to Old Kingdom capabilities must account for technological development across centuries. If anything, this Serapeum shows that Egyptian stoneworking knowledge persisted and improved. It does not require a vanished high-tech civilization preceding Khufu. It shows continuity of craft. The granite question ultimately reinforces an important principle. Hard material does not equal impossible. Human ingenuity, given time and repetition, can shape granite without electricity or steel. One must also consider organisational capacity. Carving and placing granite boxes underground required coordination similar to that required at Giza. The Egyptians maintained quarry networks at Aswan for millennia. Transport infrastructure along the Nile remained central to their economy. The Great Pyramid's granite beams demonstrate that granite shaping was already within Egyptian capability during the Fourth Dynasty. The Serapeum extends that demonstration into later periods. Thus, the granite question shifts from mystery to mastery. It reveals a long tradition of stoneworking skill that adapted to material challenges. It underscores that precision in granite was not a singular event, but part of a continuum. The presence of such skill invites reconsideration of the Great Pyramid's internal granite chambers. Rather than appearing as anomalies, They fit within a larger pattern of Egyptian craftsmanship. At the same time, the psychological impact of massive granite forms cannot be dismissed. They amplify wonder, they prompt speculation, they invite reinterpretation of technological limits. Understanding that these structures were achieved with copper, bronze, stone, sand, and disciplined labour does not reduce their significance. It elevates the ingenuity of those who designed and executed them. The Serapeum stands as a reminder that skill can exceed expectation without exceeding historical plausibility. It strengthens the argument that the Great Pyramid's precision reflects cumulative human expertise rather than lost advanced technology. As the investigation continues, attention turns toward the possibility that some knowledge was inherited rather than invented during Khufu's reign. If Egyptian builders demonstrated such continuity of skill, one must ask whether the Great Pyramid represents innovation or inheritance within a longer architectural tradition. When confronted with the Great Pyramid's precision, scale, and endurance, the mind sometimes leaps towards singular genius. It is tempting to imagine one extraordinary moment in history when knowledge appeared fully formed. Yet architecture rarely emerges in isolation. It grows through accumulation. The question, then, is not whether the pyramid required advanced understanding, but whether that understanding was invented during Khufu's reign, or inherited from earlier generations. Inheritance in this context does not mean borrowing from a lost global civilization or an unknown advanced culture. It means continuity within Egypt itself, knowledge transmitted across reigns, refined across projects, and embedded within institutions. The architectural lineage is visible. Mastabas preceded stepped pyramids. The step pyramid preceded smooth-sided pyramids. The bent pyramid revealed structural stress. The red pyramid corrected it. By the time Khufu began his monument at Giza, the tradition of pyramid building was already several generations old. Imhotep's step pyramid demonstrated that limestone could replace mud brick at monumental scale. Sneferu's projects demonstrated that smooth faces could stand without collapse if slope was moderated. These achievements were not erased when a new king ascended the throne. They formed a technical inheritance. Architects and overseers likely trained successors. Scribes recorded measurements. Surveyors practiced alignment techniques repeatedly.
The concept of Sekhed did not appear suddenly in the 5th dynasty mathematical papyri. It likely existed in practical form earlier, refined through application. Inheritance also includes material infrastructure. Quarry networks were established. River transport routes were standardized. Labor organization methods were tested and improved. A state capable of building at Dashur did not need to rediscover basic logistics at Giza. The speed of development between the bent pyramid and the Great Pyramid sometimes appears dramatic. However, this span includes the entire reign of Sneferu and the transition to Khufu. It represents decades of experimentation, correction, and stabilization. Within that time frame, incremental improvement is plausible. The notion of inheritance becomes clearer when one considers that large-scale architecture requires cumulative error correction. Lessons learned from structural cracking at Dashur would have informed slope decisions at Giza. Knowledge of bedrock preparation would have carried forward. Surveying methods tested in earlier projects would have been refined. There is also symbolic inheritance. Pyramid shape itself evolved from earlier burial forms. The mastaba represented status. The step pyramid amplified it. The smooth-sided pyramid refined it. Each stage preserved core symbolism while adjusting form. The Great Pyramid may therefore represent not invention, but synthesis.
It integrated accumulated structural lessons, geometric conventions, and symbolic intentions into a coherent whole. Its refinement reflects maturity rather than spontaneous brilliance. Some argue that the Great Pyramid's precision exceeds what incremental inheritance could explain. Yet architectural history often shows peak achievements emerging after long preparation. Gothic cathedrals did not appear without Romanesque predecessors. Renaissance engineering did not appear without medieval foundations. Inheritance also explains why later pyramids declined in scale and precision. Political decentralization and economic strain during the late Old Kingdom reduced resources available for monumental construction. Knowledge may have remained, but capacity diminished. The first intermediate period disrupted central authority. When the Middle Kingdom re-established unity, pyramid construction resumed, but with different priorities and techniques. Architectural ambition is sensitive to political stability. Inheritance does not imply stagnation. It allows for adaptation. The architects serving Khufu may have improved upon inherited methods. They may have adjusted slope ratios, refined alignment procedures, and optimized workforce management. At the same time, inheritance provides a grounded explanation for competence. There is no need to assume lost high technology when a visible developmental chain exists. The idea that knowledge predates Khufu within Egypt does not require mystical antiquity. It requires recognition of generational transmission. Apprentices learn from masters. Institutions preserve techniques. Ritual ceremonies encode measurement procedures. The stretching of the cord ceremony illustrates this blend of ritual and practical inheritance. Priests and surveyors participated in laying foundations. The act carried symbolic meaning while establishing geometric lines. Such ceremonies likely passed through generations with continuity. It is also possible that some knowledge extended even further back than surviving monuments indicate. Pre-dynastic Egypt shows evidence of stoneworking and surveying at smaller scale. While no pre-dynastic pyramids exist, foundational skills may have deeper roots. Inheritance also includes intellectual frameworks. The concept of ma'at, cosmic order, influenced architecture. Aligning structures to cardinal directions was not merely technical, it was ideological. Such worldview inheritance shapes design decisions. The absence of explicit design manuals does not undermine inheritance. Practical knowledge can survive without formal textbooks. Skilled communities preserve technique through demonstration and repetition. It is important, however, to distinguish internal inheritance from external speculation. Some propose that the Great Pyramid's knowledge derived from an earlier lost global civilization. There is no archaeological evidence supporting such claims. No material culture at Giza suggests foreign technological intrusion. Egyptian artifacts, inscriptions, and quarry marks align with known Old Kingdom practices. The tools found correspond to techniques required. The progression of pyramid design remains geographically and culturally continuous. Inheritance within Egypt provides sufficient explanatory power. It accounts for structural evolution, slope refinement, alignment improvement, and workforce organization. Yet inheritance does not eliminate individuality. Even within inherited systems, individuals interpret and innovate. The architect of the Great Pyramid, whoever he was, operated within a tradition but made decisions specific to Khufu's project. Choosing the final slope angle, determining chamber placement, refining alignment procedures, and overseeing granite integration were not automatic outcomes of tradition. They required judgment. Inheritance also interacts with ambition. Khufu's pyramid surpassed all previous structures in scale. That ambition may have driven further refinement of inherited methods. Pushing tradition to new limits often reveals its strengths and weaknesses. One must also consider the human element of memory. Institutional knowledge can persist only as long as stability allows. The Old Kingdom's centralized power provided such stability. When that power fragmented, monumental building declined.
Inheritance therefore appears as the most grounded explanation for the Great Pyramid's technical foundation. It situates the monument within Egyptian continuity rather than isolating it as an anomaly. Still, the idea of inheritance invites another question. If knowledge was inherited within Egypt, could it have extended beyond Egypt's borders? Trade networks connected Egypt to Nubia, the Levant, and beyond. Cultural exchange occurred. However, there is no evidence that external architectural traditions influenced pyramid geometry during the Fourth Dynasty. The form evolved locally. Its symbolism aligns with Egyptian cosmology. The inheritance hypothesis thus reinforces internal development. It emphasizes cumulative learning rather than sudden revelation. As attention shifts from inherited tradition to alternative architect theories, the investigation moves beyond grounded continuity into speculative territory. Some propose that the Great Pyramid's design reflects knowledge beyond human inheritance. Examining those claims requires careful separation of evidence from imagination.
When a structure endures for thousands of years and seems to defy intuitive expectations, imagination begins to fill the gaps left by missing records. The Great Pyramid has inspired more alternative origin theories than perhaps any other ancient monument. Some propose that it was not designed by Old Kingdom Egyptians at all, but by Atlanteans, Anunnaki, or an advanced lost civilization predating recorded history. These ideas persist because they offer dramatic explanations for precision and scale. If the monument appears too sophisticated for copper tools and rope, then perhaps its designers were not bound by such limitations. Perhaps they possessed lost science. Perhaps they inherited knowledge from a civilization erased by catastrophe. The Atlantis theory traces back to Plato's dialogues, where he described a powerful island civilization destroyed by flood. Plato wrote in the 4th century BCE, more than 2,000 years after the Great Pyramid was built. He did not mention Egypt in connection with Atlantis constructing pyramids. Later writers connected the myth with Egyptian monuments, suggesting that survivors of Atlantis transmitted architectural knowledge. There is no archaeological evidence linking Atlantis to Giza. No artifacts, inscriptions, or structural anomalies indicate foreign origin. The Great Pyramid's construction methods align with known Egyptian quarrying and transport techniques. The cultural symbolism embedded in its design reflects Egyptian cosmology, not an external mythic framework. The Anunnaki theory emerges from interpretations of ancient Mesopotamian texts. Some modern writers propose that the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial beings who visited Earth in antiquity and transmitted advanced technology. In this view, pyramids worldwide become evidence of alien intervention. This hypothesis relies on reinterpretations of Sumerian mythology rather than archaeological data. The Great Pyramid contains no inscriptions describing non-human architects, no anomalous materials or construction techniques inconsistent with Egyptian capability have been found. The granite beams, limestone blocks, and internal passages show human tool marks and logistical planning consistent with Old Kingdom practice. Another variation suggests a lost advanced human civilization predating Egypt, destroyed by natural disaster. According to this view, Egyptians inherited knowledge from this earlier culture and applied it at Giza. This idea often connects to theories about global floods or forgotten high-technology societies. While catastrophic events have occurred throughout history, there is no archaeological evidence of a technologically advanced civilization predating the Old Kingdom capable of constructing pyramids at Giza. Excavations around the plateau reveal consistent Old Kingdom material culture.
Tools, pottery, worker settlements, and quarry remains aligned with the period's known technology. Alternative architect theories often arise from perceived anomalies: precision alignment, massive stone blocks, mathematical relationships. Yet each of these features can be explained within the framework of cumulative Egyptian development, as previously discussed. One must consider why such theories persist despite lack of evidence. Part of the reason lies in psychological scale. The Great Pyramid's size triggers disbelief. Humans tend to equate size with technological advancement. When confronted with ancient scale, modern observers sometimes underestimate ancient patience in organization. There is also the allure of mystery. A named pharaoh and an unnamed architect within a known civilization feel less dramatic than survivors of a vanished global empire. Alternative narratives capture imagination more readily than incremental development. However, the absence of direct textual explanation does not validate external authorship. Silence in records is not proof of alien involvement. It reflects preservation limitations and cultural priorities. It is important to acknowledge that ancient cultures around the world constructed pyramidal structures independently. Mesoamerican pyramids developed without Egyptian influence. Architectural convergence occurs because pyramidal forms are structurally stable and symbolically potent. Stability and symbolic ascent are universal concepts.
The Great Pyramid's geometry does not require extraterrestrial mathematics. Sect ratios and practical surveying suffice. Its alignment does not require telescopes. Stellar observation with plumb lines suffices. Its granite beams do not require laser cutting. Abrasive sand suffices. Claims that advanced machining marks appear on granite blocks have been examined and found consistent with manual abrasion techniques. No residue of high-speed drills or exotic materials has been detected. No tool fragments inconsistent with copper and stone have been uncovered at Giza. Some alternative theories point to global alignments, suggesting that pyramids across continents share precise positional relationships. These arguments often rely on selective measurement and ignore vast differences in chronology and construction method. The Anunnaki hypothesis sometimes references the Sumerian king list and mythological narratives. While fascinating in their own right, Mesopotamian texts do not mention constructing Egyptian pyramids. The cultural contexts are distinct. There is also a pattern in which alternative theories underestimate Egyptian civilization while attributing capability to hypothetical outsiders. Modern scholarship emphasizes the need to credit ancient Egyptians with their achievements, rather than assume external intervention. The archaeological record at Giza supports Egyptian origin. Worker villages, bakeries, administrative papyri, quarry marks, and burial practices all align with 4th Dynasty culture. Nothing suggests a foreign technological elite directing construction. It is also worth noting that alternative theories rarely explain logistical details convincingly. Moving millions of blocks requires organized labor regardless of origin. Even advanced beings would need infrastructure to transport stone. No evidence of non-human infrastructure exists. Alternative architect narratives often shift focus from evidence to speculation. They highlight unanswered questions while overlooking answered ones. The absence of a preserved blueprint becomes evidence of secrecy rather than of lost papyrus. Still, curiosity about such possibilities reflects human desire for wonder. The Great Pyramid inspires awe. That awe sometimes seeks extraordinary explanation. However, disciplined inquiry requires grounding in material evidence. The monument's evolution from earlier Egyptian projects remains visible. The step pyramid introduced vertical stone construction. The bent pyramid revealed structural correction. The red pyramid demonstrated stable, smooth faces. The Great Pyramid refined precision and scale. This sequence leaves little room for abrupt external insertion. Alternative architect theories also fail to explain why later Egyptian monuments show similar techniques. Temples at Karnak, obelisks at Aswan, and granite statues across Egypt display continuity of craftsmanship. If alien or Atlantean knowledge existed, it would likely appear inconsistently or abruptly. Instead, the record shows gradual development. In evaluating such claims, one must distinguish between imaginative possibility and evidentiary support. It is possible to imagine advanced ancient civilizations. It is possible to speculate about extraterrestrial visitors. It is not possible to confirm these hypotheses without material evidence. The Great Pyramid stands as a product of a specific cultural and historical moment. Its design aligns with Egyptian religious symbolism, administrative organization, and material culture. Its construction methods correspond with archaeological findings. The persistence of alternative architect theories reveals more about modern fascination with mystery than about ancient reality. They remind us that gaps in knowledge invite storytelling, yet storytelling should not replace evidence. As the investigation returns from speculative territory to grounded analysis, attention turns toward a more focused possibility. If not Atlanteans or extraterrestrials, could the pyramid have been conceived by a single extraordinary mind within Egypt? Or was its design the product of collective decision-making rather than singular authorship? When considering the Great Pyramid's coherence, one question inevitably emerges. Was this monument the product of a single guiding intelligence, a master builder who held the entire design in mind from foundation to apex? Or was it the result of accumulated decisions layered across years of construction? The idea of a master builder is compelling. A unified vision would explain the pyramid's proportional consistency, its integrated internal passages, and its careful alignment. One mind could have defined slope, chamber placement, orientation, and structural reinforcement in advance. The workforce would then execute that plan under supervision. Ancient Egypt did recognize high officials responsible for royal works. Titles such as Overseer of all royal construction projects appear in inscriptions. These individuals were not mere foremen, they were administrators and likely technical authorities. Hemiunu, often proposed as a candidate for chief architect of the Great Pyramid, held titles associated with royal works and was buried at Giza in a mastaba of considerable prominence. His statue survives, portraying a composed and confident figure. While no inscription explicitly names him as designer of the pyramid, his proximity to Khufu's court and his titles make him plausible. If Hemiunu or someone like him served as master builder, he would have needed both technical skill and political authority. The scale of the project required coordination across quarries, transport routes and workforce divisions. Decisions about slope and chamber layout would need to be finalised before large-scale construction advanced too far. The internal layout of the Great Pyramid supports the idea of cohesive planning. The descending passage, the ascending passage, the Grand Gallery and the King's Chamber form a deliberate sequence. The relieving chambers above the King's Chamber appear premeditated rather than improvised. At the same time, certain features suggest possible modification during construction. The subterranean chamber appears unfinished. The Queen's Chamber may have served an initial burial plan later altered. If design evolved mid-project, that would indicate flexibility rather than rigid singular vision. Large-scale construction projects often combine both. A chief architect establishes core parameters. Subsequent adjustments respond to practical considerations. Structural stress, material availability, or ritual preference may prompt revisions. The master builder theory does not require solitary genius working in isolation. It requires centralized authority guiding distributed expertise. Within that framework, specialized teams contribute to different aspects, while overall coherence is maintained. Consider the slope angle of approximately 51.5 degrees. This decision affects height, mass distribution, and visual impact. Choosing such a ratio likely occurred early.
Altering slope midway would have been impractical. This suggests that foundational geometric decisions were determined before construction advanced significantly. Similarly, base alignment to true north had to be established at the outset. Any major correction after initial courses were laid would have been nearly impossible. Such early decisions point toward a guiding plan rather than incremental improvisation. However, the pyramid's construction spanned roughly 2 decades. Over such time, generational input could occur. Apprentices trained under senior officials. If the chief architect died during the project, a successor may have continued work based on established plans. Egyptian administration was stable during Khufu's reign, but mortality was real. The continuity of design despite potential personnel changes implies institutional rather than purely individual memory. One must also consider that architectural planning in ancient societies often relied on proportional systems rather than detailed scale drawings. A few core measurements could define the entire structure. Once slope and base dimensions were fixed, much of the pyramid's geometry followed naturally. This proportional approach reduces the need for exhaustive blueprints. It allows trained overseers to apply consistent ratios across layers. In that sense, one mind could define principles while many hands implemented them. The integration of astronomical alignment further supports centralized planning.
Observations of star transits to determine north likely occurred before construction began. This foundational alignment guided subsequent layout. Such precision requires deliberate early coordination. The relieving chambers above the king's chamber also indicate foresight. They were not added casually. Their design redistributes weight to prevent collapse. This solution reflects understanding of compressive forces before upper layers were fully stacked. At the same time, minor irregularities in block placement suggest that not every detail was micromanaged by a single mind. Construction at such scale inevitably involves small deviations. Quality control mechanisms likely operated within acceptable tolerance ranges. The master builder theory gains strength from coherence. The Great Pyramid feels unified. Its proportions relate logically. Its internal and external geometries align. Such unity implies overarching design rather than chaotic accumulation. Yet unity does not exclude collaboration. In modern architecture, a chief architect leads a team of engineers, surveyors, and craftsmen. The final structure reflects collective effort guided by shared standards. The Egyptian state operated hierarchically. Authority flowed downward from the pharaoh. A chief architect may have reported directly to Khufu. Below him, layers of officials supervised quarrying, transport, and placement. This layered system balances individual vision with institutional continuity.
The master builder may have articulated goals, while administrators ensured compliance. It is also worth considering the cultural dimension of authorship. In ancient Egypt, individual fame often merged with royal identity. Projects were attributed to the king as divine representative. The architect's personal legacy may have been secondary. If Hemunu or another official directed design, his role might have been understood as service rather than authorship. The pyramid was Khufu's monument. The architect's identity was embedded within that framework. The possibility of many generations shaping design remains limited by chronology. The pyramid's construction likely occurred within a single reign. However, the knowledge informing it spanned multiple generations. In that sense, even if one mind finalized the plan, many minds prepared the ground. The master builder theory thus resolves into a hybrid understanding. A principal architect likely oversaw design and execution. He operated within inherited tradition and institutional structure. His decisions integrated accumulated knowledge into a coherent plan. Rejecting the idea of a singular mastermind entirely overlooks the need for centralized coordination. Rejecting institutional inheritance overlooks the continuity visible in earlier pyramids. The Great Pyramid likely reflects both. One guiding authority synthesized geometric, astronomical, and logistical principles.
That synthesis rested upon decades of experimentation and training. Understanding this balance clarifies authorship without romanticizing genius or dismissing collective effort. It situates design within human systems rather than mythic isolation. As the investigation approaches its conclusion, attention returns to the central figure traditionally associated with the monument. If not external architects or anonymous generations alone, then what evidence supports or challenges the attribution to Khufu's administration specifically? Khufu's name has long been attached to the Great Pyramid. The monument is traditionally called his pyramid, and the plateau itself bears witness to his dynasty. Yet the attribution rests on surprisingly limited direct evidence. Re-examining that evidence carefully helps clarify how strong the connection truly is and whether alternative attributions hold weight. The most significant link between Khufu and the Great Pyramid comes from quarry marks discovered within the relieving chambers above the king's chamber. These marks include work gang names such as the Friends of Khufu and references to Khufu's royal titulary. They were not meant for public display. They were construction graffiti left by crews during building. Their hidden placement strengthens authenticity. It is unlikely that such marks were later additions, as accessing those chambers requires dismantling parts of the structure. The graffiti indicates that workers identified themselves as serving Khufu during construction. Beyond these marks, there is indirect evidence. Khufu ruled during the 4th dynasty, following Sneferu, whose pyramids at Dashur demonstrate architectural progression. The scale of the Great Pyramid fits the pattern of escalating ambition within this dynasty. Khafra and Menkaure, Khufu's successors, built slightly smaller pyramids at Giza. The chronological placement aligns logically. However, critics sometimes argue that direct inscriptions explicitly stating Khufu built this pyramid are absent from visible walls. This absence fuels speculation that the pyramid predates Khufu and was later appropriated. Such speculation encounters difficulty when confronted with archaeological context. The worker village at Giza dates to the 4th dynasty. Pottery shards, tool remains, and organic material align with Khufu's era. Quarry sites near the plateau show extraction patterns consistent with that period. The Diary of Mera provides additional support. This papyrus, discovered at Wadi al-Jarf, records limestone shipments during Khufu's reign to a location identified as Akhet Khufu, meaning horizon of Khufu. This name is associated with the Great Pyramid complex. Mera's account demonstrates active logistical support for construction during Khufu's lifetime. It is rare in ancient history to possess administrative documents directly linked to monumental building. Mera's diary stands as one of the few surviving operational records. While it does not describe architectural design in detail, it confirms organised activity related to the pyramid during Khufu's reign. Alternative proposals sometimes suggest that Khufu inherited an older structure and merely renovated it. Yet structural analysis shows continuity in construction style between the Great Pyramid and Sneferu's earlier projects. Masonry techniques, quarry marks, and architectural progression support a 4th dynasty origin rather than an earlier unknown civilization. If the pyramid predated Khufu significantly, one would expect evidence of earlier material culture embedded within its foundation or surrounding context. Excavations have not revealed such anomalies. Instead, the artifacts align consistently with the 4th dynasty. There is also the matter of the surrounding complex. The Great Pyramid is not isolated. It is part of a larger layout including mortuary temples, causeways, and subsidiary pyramids. These structures correspond stylistically and chronologically with Khufu's era. The boat pits near the pyramid contain dismantled cedar vessels, one of which has been reconstructed. Radiocarbon dating and construction techniques align with the 4th dynasty. These boats were likely intended for Khufu's symbolic journey in the afterlife. If the pyramid belonged to another earlier civilization, the surrounding complex would need to reflect that origin as well. Instead, the entire site integrates into known Old Kingdom patterns. Some arguments focus on the absence of Khufu's mummy within the pyramid. The sarcophagus remains, but no body was found. Tomb robbery is well documented in Egyptian history. Many royal tombs were looted in antiquity. The absence of a mummy does not negate original ownership. The lack of elaborate decoration inside Khufu's pyramid has also been cited as suspicious. However, as noted earlier, internal pyramid texts appear later in the 5th dynasty. Khufu's pyramid predates that tradition. Another line of speculation questions whether Khufu possessed the political capacity to commission such a monument. Archaeological evidence suggests that the 4th dynasty represented a period of centralized power and economic stability. Sneferu's successful pyramid projects demonstrate that the state had already mobilized resources at large scale. Khufu inherited that administrative apparatus. The scale of his pyramid reflects both ambition and capacity within that context. it is important to examine the possibility of misattribution objectively. If Khufu did not commission the Great Pyramid, an alternative candidate must be identified. No inscriptions, artifacts, or records point to another pharaoh claiming such a project. Later rulers often restored or repurposed earlier monuments, sometimes adding inscriptions claiming credit. No such inscriptions exist attributing the Great Pyramid to another king. The consistency of archaeological dating methods further supports Khufu's reign as the period of construction. Radiocarbon dating of organic material associated with the pyramid, including mortar samples, aligns with the 4th dynasty. While radiocarbon dating has margins of error and occasional anomalies, the overall pattern remains consistent with Khufu's era rather than a vastly earlier period. The quarry at Tura, from which fine limestone casing stones were transported, shows extraction activity corresponding to the 4th dynasty. The transport routes along the Nile described in Mera's diary confirm logistical links to Giza. One must also consider historiography. Ancient Egyptian king lists compiled during later periods include Khufu within the 4th dynasty sequence. While these lists focus on royal succession rather than construction projects, they reflect continuity of dynastic memory. Greek historian Herodotus, writing centuries later, attributes the Great Pyramid to a king he calls Cheops, widely understood to be Khufu. While Herodotus's accounts include inaccuracies, his identification aligns with Egyptian tradition preserved through time. Re-examining the evidence reveals that attribution to Khufu rests not on a single inscription, but on converging lines of data: quarry graffiti, administrative papyri, archaeological context, radiocarbon dating, and dynastic continuity. The absence of a carved dedication inside the pyramid does not undermine this convergence. Many ancient monuments lack explicit authorship statements. Attribution relies on contextual evidence rather than ceremonial plaques. Speculation about alternative builders often arises from perceived gaps rather than contradictory evidence. The gaps are real. Detailed blueprints are missing. The architect's name remains uncertain. Yet absence of detail does not equate to absence of authorship. The cumulative evidence supports Khufu as commissioner of the Great Pyramid within the 4th dynasty framework. Whether he personally influenced design decisions or delegated entirely to officials remains open to interpretation. The administrative structure of his reign clearly supported monumental construction. Re-examining the evidence strengthens rather than weakens the attribution. It reveals that while mystery surrounds specific technical choices, the broader historical context remains coherent. The question of if not Khufu, then who, thus narrows significantly. No credible alternative candidate emerges from archaeological record. The monument fits within Khufu's political, economic and architectural environment. As the inquiry approaches its closing reflections, attention turns from attribution toward legacy. Regardless of individual authorship details, the Great Pyramid stands as an enduring testament to human coordination, ambition, and design. Understanding its origins clarifies history, but its continued presence invites contemplation beyond names and dates. The Great Pyramid stands in the desert long after the voices that planned it have fallen silent. Its limestone core has weathered wind and sun. Its polished casing stones, once bright against the horizon, are mostly gone. The monument no longer gleams as it did in Khufu's time. Yet its geometry remains, its alignment remains, its mass remains. When considering who really designed it, the question gradually becomes less about a single name and more about a convergence of minds. The architect, whether Hemiunu or another official whose name has not survived, did not operate in isolation. He inherited techniques refined at Saqqara and Dashur. He relied on surveyors who read the stars. He depended on craftsmen who understood stone grain and slope ratios. He worked within a state apparatus capable of feeding and organizing thousands. Design, in this context, was not merely drawing lines on papyrus. It was defining proportions that could be translated into millions of placed blocks. It was selecting an angle that balanced ambition with stability. It was deciding where to carve passages, how to distribute weight above the king's chamber, and how to align the base to true north. The absence of surviving blueprints does not diminish that process. It shifts attention toward the monument itself as the surviving document. Every measured cubit reflects intention. Every aligned corner reflects repetition and verification. Every granite beam placed above the burial chamber reflects anticipation of compressive force. Legacy extends beyond stone. The Great Pyramid shaped architectural ambition for generations. Khafra and Menkaure followed at Giza. Later dynasties built pyramids with different proportions and internal designs. The form evolved, declined in scale, and eventually disappeared from royal practice. Yet the idea of monumental permanence endured. For centuries after the Old Kingdom, the pyramid remained a symbol of royal legitimacy. Even when political authority fragmented, the monument stood as a reminder of centralized power once achieved. Its presence influenced later rulers' understanding of what was possible. The minds behind the stone were not superhuman. They were disciplined observers, practical engineers, and administrators grounded in their cultural worldview. They did not possess steel cranes or digital instruments. They possessed rope, copper, stone, sand, and time. They possessed knowledge accumulated across generations. They possessed a state willing to invest decades into a single project. That combination created something that still resists erosion. Wind smooths edges. Earthquakes shift layers. Humans dismantle casing stones. Yet the structure persists. It persists because design and execution aligned. The question of whether one master builder held the full plan, or whether collective decision-making shaped its evolution, ultimately converges on shared responsibility. Even if a chief architect defined proportions, he relied on teams to implement them. Even if Khufu commissioned the project, his authority depended on institutional stability. The pyramid therefore becomes less a monument to a single ego, and more a monument to coordinated human effort within a stable political moment. That moment did not last indefinitely. The Old Kingdom eventually weakened. Resources dwindled, ambition shifted. But for a period, design and capacity matched. It is easy to romanticize mystery. The silence of inscriptions invites imagination. The precision of alignment invites speculation. Yet grounded understanding reveals something equally compelling. Humans, organized and patient, achieved extraordinary results without invoking lost civilizations or external intervention. There is a quiet dignity in that realization. It restores authorship to those whose material traces remain in quarry marks and worker graffiti. It credits surveyors who watch the circumpolar stars. It acknowledges craftsmen who smooth granite with abrasive sand. It recognizes administrators who tracked shipments in papyrus ledgers. Legacy also extends into the present. Modern engineers study the pyramid to understand ancient methods. Archaeologists measure slopes and calculate deviations. Visitors stand at its base and look upward, feeling the scale with their own eyes. The monument has become part of global consciousness. It appears in textbooks, documentaries, and private reflections. It symbolizes endurance. It symbolizes inquiry. It symbolizes the capacity of organized society to shape landscape into geometry. Design, when viewed across millennia, becomes a form of communication. The pyramid communicates ambition without words. It communicates stability through alignment. It communicates continuity through survival. The minds behind the stone did not anticipate modern debates about extraterrestrials or Atlanteans. They were concerned with ensuring structural integrity, fulfilling ritual obligations, and honouring their king. Their objectives were immediate and cultural, yet the result transcended immediate purpose. The Great Pyramid now stands as evidence of human capability within historical context. It challenges assumptions about technological limitation. It demonstrates that knowledge need not be advanced by modern standards to produce lasting architecture. As night falls over the Giza plateau, the pyramid's edges soften into shadow. The cardinal lines it embodies remain fixed. The stars it once aligned with continue their slow procession, altered slightly by precession, but still predictable. The builders who watch those stars are gone. The tools they used have corroded or been buried. The papyrus on which they may have drawn plans has disintegrated. What remains is proportion in stone. Understanding who designed the Great Pyramid ultimately reveals less about hidden secrets and more about visible systems. It reveals inheritance rather than sudden invention. It reveals leadership supported by workforce organisation. It reveals astronomy integrated into architecture. It reveals mathematics embedded in proportion. The design was human, the legacy is enduring, and the stone continues to hold its quiet alignment with earth and sky, inviting reflection not on mystery alone, but on the disciplined minds that shaped it and the long arc of history that has allowed it to remain.